This is an exam where you stake your life on the gamble. Your real body has to grind through practice questions. Only by passing can you stay alive. A cool, aloof examinee runs into a scheming proctor. They think it's their first meeting, but in fact it's a reunion after a long separation. Both of them have lost their memories. Who is going to wake up that erased past? He stared at the other and asked, "Have I seen you before?" The other person suddenly shot back, "Do you smoke? My great examiner, I didn't come here to save you. I came here to love you. The world is very bright and very big. Welcome home." When a king faces off against a king, either they destroy each other or you're strong and I'm even stronger, so we might as well team up and blow the examination hall sky high. The story begins on a stretch of blinding snowfield. A dozen or so men and women, young and old, from different places, squeeze into the only wooden hut. None of them can remember how they got there, and the air is filled with unease, because they discover that they can't get out at all. No matter which way they walk, they always end up back at this dilapidated hut. Suddenly, a mechanical voice comes from the old radio. "Welcome to the large-scale, highly dangerous worldwide unified exam, global examination. All examinees have entered. The exam rules are as follows. You may not leave the examination room without authorization midway, or you will bear the consequences yourself. Scores are calculated by time points, and examinees must write their answers on the designated answer sheet. Otherwise, the answers will be invalid. The exam duration is 48 hours, and the subject is physics. The exam officially begins. As the voice falls, dong, 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 the bell tolls, and the radio offers no further explanation. They say it's an exam, but there isn't even a test paper or pen and paper on site, and everyone panics. It's at this moment that Yu-hok wakes up. There was hardly any expression on his face as he walked over coldly and pushed open the window. Then, he directly ignored the other people's questioning and threw an iron can out of the window. Immediately, everyone watched with their own eyes as the iron can turned into a pile of powder before them. In an instant, everyone's faces went pale, terror written in their eyes. Only then did Yu-hok turn around and speak faintly. "I just wanted to see what would happen if someone was expelled from the exam hall." At this moment, lines of text like exam questions appeared on the wall. Question stem. A group of travelers arrive at a snowy mountain. Next to it was written, "The papers will be collected once every 6 hours. If no scoring points are hit, one person will be randomly expelled from the exam hall." Everyone had just seen with their own eyes what happened to the iron can, and fear immediately spread through the crowd. Only Yu-hok showed almost no emotion, quietly scanning the surroundings. His younger brother Yu-mun turned his head and discovered that there was actually an axe in his hand, and couldn't help asking, "Why are you holding that?" Yu-hok's voice sounded as cold as ice. On the other side, a pregnant woman, under everyone's urging, dipped her finger in ink and started writing on the wall. But a bizarre scene occurred. No matter what, the ink would not leave a mark on the wall, and a man refused to believe this. He snatched the ink bottle and splashed it straight at the wall. But Yu-hok suddenly grabbed his wrist and forcibly stopped him. "There's something wrong with the wall." After saying that, he told Yu-mun to hand him the hemp rope. Then, without another unnecessary word, he directly tied up the man who had grabbed the ink. Just then, an eerie voice actually came from a chicken. "Violation warning. Failure to use approved exam stationery. The invigilator has been notified. Jin-gu, ilobisa, Gibai." The instant the words fell, outside the window, through the wind and snow, 3 figures slowly approached. The 3, wrapped in wind and snow, pushed the door open and entered. At the front, Jin-gu's gaze was sharp as a blade, sweeping over everyone in the room. Yu-hok also lifted his eyes to look over. At the moment their gazes collided, he subconsciously raised his hand and lightly pressed the black stud earring at his earlobe. Yu-mun hid behind him and asked in a low voice, "Bro, you don't actually know them, do you? You've had amnesia for so long." The man narrowed his eyes, staring at the people at the door, and slowly lowered his hand. 3 men in impeccably tailored suits pushed the door open and came in. The faces of the people inside instantly turned pale. They were here to take away 2 of them for punishment. Yet just now, everyone had clearly seen the can thrown out the window crushed into powder in the snow. But these people were completely unscathed as they walked in. They merely swept a casual glance around. Then one of them drew out a sheet of paper and calmly explained, "We are the invigilators for this exam. I am Ilobisa. We received a report that 2 of you did not answer according to the rules." The room exploded at once. Who broke the rules? Ilobisa took out a pre-prepared slip of paper and read from it. "The violators? 1 middle-aged man and 1 little girl?" Immediately, someone stepped forward and directly hauled away the uncle whom Yu-hok had tied up. But when it came to the other little girl written on the paper, They hesitated, as if they simply couldn't see the pregnant woman. The leader, Jin-gu, instead fixed his gaze on Yu-hok in front and then said, "The other one is him. Take him away," as if he had completely forgotten that the locator described a little girl. At that, even Ilobisa was thrown into confusion. He didn't care what expressions anyone else was making. Jin-gu was the first to walk out of the wooden hut, and this time Yu-hok and the others were actually not crushed into powder by the snow. Following Jin-gu into the snow, they left a neat line of footprints behind them. They finally arrived at the punishment site, a small Western-style building. Even standing outside the door, they could hear the pleading coming from inside. At this moment, Jin-gu asked Yu-hok in a harsh tone, "Scared? This is the punishment for breaking the rules." And Yu-hok still remembered how he had tallied that score of treating him as a little girl. He turned his head and walked off with a dark expression, not giving the other even a glance. Jin-gu didn't mind, only raised his brows and watched his back as he left. The farther they went in, the clearer the wailing and howling inside the building became. So eerie it sent a chill down the spine. Yu-hok, walking in front, showed no reaction. The bald man being escorted by Gibisum, however, was so frightened along the way that he lost control of himself several times. Yu-hok was sweeping his gaze around, unable to figure out what kind of punishment this was supposed to be. Jin-gu stepped forward and gave a crisp order, "Take them to solitary confinement." Yu-hok was momentarily speechless, only feeling as if they were playing house. Expressionless, he watched the middle-aged man who was being taken to solitary. The man was on the verge of dropping to his knees. Ilobisa raised a hand and patted him, signaling him to enter the solitary cell. Yu-hok clearly felt that the hand resting on his shoulder was trembling. He turned his head and asked, "Are you afraid?" Ilobisa's pupils suddenly shrank, and he shot back at once. "What would I be afraid of? I'm the proctor. The one who should be scared is you." Yu-hok could tell he was overreacting, and pressed on, "Don't tell me you've been locked up in there too?" This time, Ilobisa didn't answer. He pulled open the door beside them and shoved Yu-hok straight inside. "Worry about yourself first. The confinement room will make you relive, over and over, the most terrifying thing in your life." With a loud bang, the door was slammed shut, and from outside came a line, "I'll come get you in 3 hours." Through the door, Ilobisa lowered his voice and said, "I hope by then you can still act this calm." Just moments ago, the proctors who had still been so dignified and restrained in front of the candidates all had completely different expressions once they returned to the office. Gibarai exploded in rage. "Fuck! That bald guy pissed on me 4 times along the way. I've never seen anyone this cowardly." Ilobisa rushed in, clutching the note in his hand so tightly it rustled from his shaking. "Little girl, this is the little girl you wrote." And we ended up dragging back some weird examinee. The two of them cursed for so long that I finally noticed. Mr. Jin-gu hadn't reacted at all. It wasn't until Gibarai roared his name that he seemed yanked back to his senses. "Jin-gu!" Jin-gu merely let his gaze sweep calmly around once and said, "I spaced out just now. How about you two complain all over again?" The two of them choked on the spot, and OR gave a dry laugh to smooth things over. "He's in a bad mood, but that doesn't mean you should grab someone who hasn't broken any rules." But Jin-gu said that even if he follows the rules no matter what, there will still be people with ink on their hands. Halfway through his sentence, he forcibly cut himself off, leaving the two subordinates so stifled they almost couldn't catch their breath. Meanwhile, in the confinement room, Yu-hok looked at the furnishings so bare it was chilling, and began to suspect that in the confinement room you'll repeatedly experience the most terrifying thing in your life, was a lie. After checking the room, there was only that strange feeling from overhead of being watched, which made him very uncomfortable. He didn't know that, in a small cubicle on the 3rd floor, Jin-gu was staring at the screens, watching each image as it switched. Yet Yu-hok's little screen, of all things, didn't change at all. This guy, does he really have nothing he's afraid of? When the 3 hours were up, OR opened the door of the confinement room. He had originally thought he would see a scene of carnage. Instead, as soon as the door opened, he froze, because nothing at all had happened inside, and the cold-faced handsome guy who'd been locked up was actually lying on the desk asleep. Hearing the noise, Yu-hok spoke with a full-on just woke-up scowl. "Done locking me up?" Ilobisa replied darkly. "Or would you like to sleep a bit longer?" Yu-hok walked out of the confinement room. The corridor was so quiet it was chilling, and the bald guy opposite was silent as well. It was still Gibarai who dragged him out. When Gibarai saw he was alone, he muttered under his breath, "Did that fake goody two-shoes Ilobisa slack off and run away again?" After that, he grabbed the balding man who was slowly sliding downward, tilted his head toward the door and said, "Let's go. I'll send you back to the exam room." Jin-gu stood upstairs watching them leave, with a persistent feeling that something was off. The black bird beside him suddenly let out 2 low, hoarse cries. After a while, Jin-gu abruptly stood up. He raised his hand and tapped the bird's beak. "Are we missing an invigilator?" He immediately went downstairs and, with a single glance, saw Ilobisa was actually in the confinement room Yu-hok had just been in. The man was tied to a chair, with a big wad of paper stuffed in his mouth. Jin-gu yanked the wad of paper from his mouth and saw the words written on it. "Fuck off, you little girl. Is this invigilator a sick Yandere or something?" His subordinate got tied to a chair by a candidate. Yet he happily stared at that insulting note and even praised how full of feeling the curse was. Ilobisa immediately erupted into a bout of yelling, swearing as he undid the ropes. Rubbing his wrists, reddened from the binding, he cursed under his breath. Other people see an invigilator and all burst into tears begging for mercy, too nervous to even make a sound. But him, first thing he does is tie me up several times over. Jin-gu listened at the side and drawled teasingly, "Is being tied up in the confinement room by a candidate really that disgraceful?" Ilobisa paused for a moment. "Yeah, good thing I didn't see it. Otherwise he'd laugh at me for 2 years." Here, the invigilators are selected from among the candidates. Only the very best can be converted. The invigilators are also ranked according to their execution ability and strength, which is what their current invigilator numbers represent. The single-digit ones are all top of the top. For example, Jin-gu. At the same time, in front of the log cabin on the snowy mountain, Gibarai slammed the bald man straight onto the ground, while Yu-hok stood to the side in a daze. So long as an invigilator was following them, they wouldn't be harmed by the snow. At this moment, Gibarai suddenly added another rule for them. People like him who had been in solitary confinement were not allowed to answer questions during this collection phase. Yu-hok's face darkened, and he stared at him coldly. Gibarai shivered under that stare and immediately waved his hands, telling Yu-hok not to look at him like that. Anyway, this kind of toothpaste question was basically a death round in the first cycle. If you couldn't step on the bonus points, someone had to be the sacrifice first. Before he finished speaking, Yu-hok had already turned and pushed the door open. As soon as the door opened, a prompt sounded inside the cabin. "Time to hand in your papers." The whole room instantly exploded. The bald man was even more dramatic, directly throwing himself to his knees on the floor and tumbling and crawling into a corner. Yuman was pinning down a yellow-haired guy, gripping a knife in his hand, his voice tight. "Bro, I found it. But time's up. Will we really be expelled from the exam room?" As soon as the rooster crowed, the doors and windows that had been locked tight suddenly all flew open, and the wind and snow blasted in. The room was in chaos. Only Yu-hok remained so calm that he seemed completely out of place. 2 sentences suddenly flashed through his mind. When the rooster crows 9 times, the G ends. Answering questions has, this idiot-level question has a trick in the first round, a pretty shameless one. Yu-hok had no time to think it through. He snatched the pen from Yuman's hand in one go. The invigilator was still reminding him, "You can't answer questions." But he vaulted straight over the long table. He stepped up to the answer wall and, just as the last rooster crow sounded, quickly carved a character. The handwriting was sloppy but decisive. In the next second, an extra line of red annotation actually appeared on the wall. Everyone was stunned, and even the wind and snow in the room stopped along with them. Gibai was completely baffled, standing in the cold wind in a daze for a few seconds before suddenly turning around to file a report. Who would have thought that in a life and death game, the so-called scoring trigger point would actually be just writing the character Jaya? Solution. Afterward, Yuman slapped his forehead and remembered that during exams, the moment he got the paper, whether he could do it or not, he would first write the character Jaya. And that alone could earn him 2 points. Yu-hok held up that knife and asked. When he left, there were only forks left as metal tools in the room. So who took this knife? Time rewinds to 3 hours earlier. Before Yu-hok was taken away by the proctor, he seized a moment when no one was paying attention and quietly tossed a low-voiced line to Yuman. Remember to look for the knife. Just because of that sentence, Yuman once again moved close to the wall and examined it carefully, and ended up discovering that on that ink-proof wall, there were crisscrossing knife marks. The knife was the designated answering tool. Back to the present, Yuman suddenly pointed at the yellow-haired guy he had pinned down and said with a smile, "He hid it. If he hadn't bumped into Gong Yao's stomach, who knows how long it would have taken us to find it." While Yuman was still complaining, the text on the wall suddenly changed. Everyone looked up and saw that the problem was much more detailed than before. The wall read, "There are 13 sets of tableware, but only 12 people can be invited to the banquet." Tested knowledge point. Optics. There is a secret hidden in the tableware, and one person is doomed to die. Requirement. Find the correct set of tableware, but do not damage it. But just at that moment, before he had time to work through the problem, That damned violation alarm sounded again. The reason was that the punished examinee had answered in violation of the rules. So Yu-hok appeared once again in the little Western-style house. Jin-gu stared at this examinee who had just been sent away, and then came back again, at a loss for words. "Do you want to move in here or something?" He called Ilobisa over and asked what the second punishment was. Ilobisa looked at this examinee and lazily answered, "Solitary confinement." Both sides fell silent. He felt there should be one more sentence to add, but just at that moment, the detector light in his hand suddenly blared an alarm. Violations prohibited. Jin-gu was instantly annoyed on the spot. He thought again. Since the confinement room is just a place to sleep anyway, why not trick another examinee into being locked up together? But before he could finish the sentence, the alarm cut him off again. Ilobisa watched from the side, completely speechless. "Boss, what on earth are you talking about?" Jin-gu willfully said. "Then we won't lock him up." Just as the person was being sent away by him, the alarm sounded again, as if saying, "I don't agree either." After all the fuss, they still decided on solitary confinement. But the examinees were violating the rules so frequently that before the confinement room was even cleaned up, they simply sent him off to clean the confinement room himself. Yu-hok had no objections and followed them into that confinement room full of bloodstains, while Gibisum chattered non-stop beside him the whole way. "Don't pull a long face. If it really came to a fight, you definitely wouldn't beat him. Jin-gu has that name for a reason, after all." Gibisum was just about to launch into one of his long speeches when Ilobisa coldly cut him off. "Go get your bucket." Although Gibisum talked a lot of nonsense, Yu-hok still caught something in it and asked directly, "You were all examinees before? So how did you become proctors?" Ilobisa replied, "That was many years ago. With outstanding grades you can transfer. It counts as a kind of special selection mechanism." Yu-hok's expression grew even colder. Selection for what? First place in courage. Just then, Yu-hok felt a gaze locking onto him. But when he looked up, he saw nothing. He withdrew his eyes and continued to ask, "What kind of people get pulled in?" Ilobisa answered on reflex, "Extremely dangerous people." But then he recalled the elderly, the young, the sick, and the pregnant in the wooden cabin on the snowy mountain. And the more he thought about it, the less right that sentence seemed. Suddenly, Ilobisa's warning light also started flashing. This was a violation alert for proctors. After working so hard to suffer through being an examinee and finally becoming a proctor, he still had to be pushed around by the system and its rules. Ilobisa had merely answered a few questions for the examinee Yu-hok, and the next second a violation alert popped up. Just then Giburai came back carrying the bucket and happened to walk in on this scene. His mouth rattled on as he scolded. Helping examinees cheat is forbidden. Abusing authority is forbidden. Talking about dangerous topics is forbidden. And improper relationships between proctors and examinees are forbidden. Giburai, when he got to the last rule, was speechless even at himself. This one is basically impossible. We should be thanking heaven and earth if no one starts fighting. If a real fight does break out, we'll have to add one more rule. Invigilators are forbidden from killing candidates. As soon as the naturally rebellious Yu-hok heard that, he immediately talked back. Then what if a candidate kills an invigilator? As soon as he said this, the two invigilators in front of him both pulled long faces and finally couldn't even be bothered to respond. They only gave a cold reminder. Just take the exam properly. If you make it out alive, there are things you'll naturally come to know. Seeing that they weren't taking the bait, Yu-hok stopped stirring up trouble and finally asked, if a candidate runs into a problem, can they also go to the invigilator? Giburai actually didn't really want him coming to him, but still answered, you can. The corner of Yu-hok's mouth hooked up as he chased the question. Then how do I find you? 9 and 2 were silent for a few seconds. Then, with a perfectly serious face, they said, use the approved pen and write Jin-gu. 3 hours later, Yu-hok was sent back to the exam room as required, while Jin-gu went to patrol the confinement rooms. He immediately saw that at the door of the one Yu-hok had originally cleaned, there was a blood-soaked bucket sitting there. There were coils of hair still wrapped inside the bucket, and at the bottom was a slip of paper pressed down on which was written, for you, no need to thank me. At this time, Ilobisa was just about to go get something to eat. Forcing down his nausea, Jin-gu replied, I won't be hungry at all today. Feeling that something was wrong, Ilobisa leaned in for a closer look. He instantly clapped a hand over his mouth and blurted out, I don't think I'll ever be hungry again in this life. The two of them just stood at the doorway talking, when Jin-gu suddenly asked, for the same candidate, what would the punishment be for a third violation? Ilobisa hesitated for a moment, not very sure. There shouldn't be a third time, right? Jin-gu only replied, what if there is? Then they'd have to be monitored on-site for the entire exam, under special scrutiny. At this moment, in the snowy cabin, Yu-hok pushed the door open and returned to the exam room. Yumun rushed up at once, words tumbling out non-stop. "Bro, how did they punish you? Are you okay?" Yu-hok raised a hand to block the knife he was waving around and said flatly, "I'm fine." He glanced at the crowd's dejected looks and couldn't help complaining, "You've been slumped like this for 3 hours?" Only Gon-won was still full of enthusiasm, turning around with a wave of his hand. Pointing at that dense patch of writing on the wall, he said proudly, "Our teacher used to say, don't worry about structure. Write down whatever comes to mind. The messier the better. You might even guess a few points right." Yu-hok looked at those useless things, immediately turned around on the spot, out of sight, out of mind. Gon-man hurried to make up for it. We also found tableware and food in the cabin. Didn't the question say 13 sets of tableware for 12 people to eat?" Yu-hok felt they couldn't be so stupid that they were beyond saving. So he asked, "And the result?" But Yumun only shook his head and sighed. "We turned this place upside down and didn't find anything." At this moment, a man in a hospital gown spoke up. "Not entirely. There are still 2 places we haven't searched." He raised his hand and pointed to the 2 locked rooms, because they had never been able to find the keys. On the doors of the 2 rooms, there hung a chicken each. Their necks were twisted at an eerie angle, staring straight out the window. In this game of life and death, there just happened to be 2 doors without keys. No matter how you looked at it, it seemed to be hinting at something. Yumun lowered his voice and said, "Bro, based on my many years of gaming experience, it's best not to mess with locked doors." Yu-hok replied carelessly, "Do I look like an idiot to you?" He casually turned around, pointed at the empty wall, and asked, "Who's touched the hunting gear?" Almost everyone turned their gaze to the yellow-haired guy at the same time. Yu-hok walked over, grabbed him by the collar, and said sternly, "Hang back up the hunting gear you took down." Crushed by his aura, the yellow-haired guy trembled and shakily put the things back. Yu-hok didn't move a step, just stood behind him, staring. When he finished hanging them, everyone finally noticed. There were still 2 empty nails left on the wall. At this moment, old Yu spoke up, saying that before the exam he'd wanted to find an umbrella, and at that time he'd already noticed the nails were empty. Yumun stared at his dad in shock. "So that means the moment we entered the house, 2 items were already missing? Then whose hands are they in?" Yu-hok lifted his gaze and coldly spat out 3 words, "Hunter A." Only then did Yumun react, so the Hunter A mentioned in the question actually exists. And someone really did win the prize. It's just that the person isn't in the house? The yellow-haired guy grumbled, "It's not like we can leave the house. If he doesn't come in, how are we supposed to find him?" Yu-hok raised his eyes and glanced at the clock on the wall. He dragged over a stool, sat himself upright, and said indifferently, "Probably the time just hasn't come yet." Seeing him like this, the others also gradually quieted down. Only the crackling of the burning fire remained in the room. At this moment, the pregnant young girl with ink-stained hands, named Yo, carefully sat down beside Yu-hok. She looked at the person who was half squinting as if dozing and apologized in a low voice. "I'm sorry. I was the one who wrote the ink, but it got you punished." She seemed truly guilty, yet her gaze was very resolute, and she whispered a promise. "If something happens, I'll take your place." Yu-hok glanced sideways at her. The next second, he lazily refused. Yu-yo grew even more curious, feeling that this person feared nothing and was ridiculously formidable. Yu-hok's tone was very calm. "Being afraid, does it help?" The young girl still wanted to say more, but when she turned her head, the person who had just been responding was already asleep. The speed at which he fell asleep left the 2 elderly people beside him dumbfounded. They muttered under their breath, "Did he not sleep at all before he came?" Time moved forward tick by tick, and in the silence, Yumun suddenly heard a strange sound. A creaking noise came from outside the door, right at the tensest moment. The chime of the clock and a rooster's crow suddenly sounded at the same time. Just then, the door was pushed open. A person holding hunting gear stood in the doorway, bursting into the room wrapped in wind and snow. He showed a strange smile. "Perfect, we've got guests." The hunter dragged a huge sack back to his cabin and, seeing this group of uninvited guests inside, was not the least bit on guard. Instead, he looked as happy as if he had seen food, and said as he walked, "With the mountain blocked by heavy snow these past 2 days, I knew there would be more food." He paused, then immediately corrected himself. "More guests coming." After speaking, he stretched his hands out over the glowing red fire to warm them, then continued, "It's really cold outside. It's almost impossible to find any game." Looking at the food he had brought back, he said lazily that it had taken him a long time to dig out a single one. Then he turned his head, a strange smile hanging at the corner of his mouth. "You're really lucky. You came just in time for my meal, but I only have enough food for 12 people, what a pity. As he spoke, he pulled out a key and opened the room that everyone had been too afraid to go near. Hunter gave them a gentlemanly smile and said, I'm really hungry. It's the first time I've had so many guests. I have to make good preparations. Just wait a bit. It'll be ready soon. No sooner had he finished speaking than he turned around and, with a bang, slammed the door shut. Only then did everyone snap back to their senses. Their expressions were all different, yet all filled with unease. That room was actually the kitchen. The more Yuman thought about it, the more wrong it felt. This bizarre hunter seemed like he wanted to eat people. Outside, the sky was sealed with snow and there wasn't a single human figure to be seen. Could it be that what was in that sack was a corpse? At that thought, Yuman's stomach lurched and he almost threw up. He forced himself to hold it back and steady himself, only to find that Yu-hok was still huddled in the chair, as if asleep. Yuman hurriedly stepped forward and shook him awake. Bro, why are you still sleeping? But Yu-hok hadn't been asleep at all. He just habitually kept his eyes closed. Yuman froze for a moment, but this was no time to press for answers. He only wanted to get rid of the trouble right in front of them. That first hunter obviously didn't look like a good person. Lowering his voice, he asked, Bro, what do we do? Who would have thought Yu-hok would lazily toss out, I'm a bit hungry, let's wait for the meal. As soon as he said that, the sound of thump, thump, thump came from the kitchen, dull, heavy chopping, like someone hacking through bone. Right after that, Hunter pushed the door open, and an indescribably strange stench rushed out at once. He spoke as if trying to soothe everyone. It'll be ready soon. Frozen meat has an especially wonderful texture. Crunchy and crackling when you chew it. You're going to love it. Everyone caught that strange, bloody smell, and paired with his perverse expression, their stomachs heaved. But right at that moment, an utterly ill-timed sound rang out. Yu-hok's stomach growled. Hunter immediately showed a finally, someone looking forward to this as much as I am expression, but smoothly followed it up with a request. He wanted one of the guests to help him carry the dishes. When they heard this, everyone instinctively shrank back a little. Only Yu-hok didn't move. He even started to get up to help, but Yuman, wearing a look of sheer terror, pinned him down with all his strength. Just then, Hunter A's voice drifted over again. Food doesn't come easy. I need someone careful. Otherwise, if you drop and break the plates, what a waste that'd be. With that, he turned his head and fixed his gaze on the bald man cowering in the corner. Then he walked over and, raising his hand, slapped him hard across the face, waking him up on the spot. Then he made up his mind. He would have this guest come and help. As he dragged him toward the kitchen, he added, Be careful when you help me, you know? Damaging the tableware will be punished. Only then did everyone come to their senses. They had thought only one person would die, but unexpectedly, no damaging the tableware was the real trap. The bald man, trembling all over, carried the plate out. Hunter pushed him back into his seat and drawled, The meat is here and there's wine. We still need one more person to help bring out the wine glasses. The time had come for another round of picking someone. As expected, the one called was our protagonist, Yu-hok. His eyes lit up, and his hand was already grabbing his jacket as if he were about to go on stage. Seeing Hunter still hadn't moved, he even took a step forward, squeezing in with a hint of intimidation. What? Having second thoughts? Hunter paused in distaste, then waved his hand and smiled. As the host, of course I keep my word. Yu-hok immediately yanked off his jacket and tossed it straight back to Yuman behind him, then stood up and walked toward Hunter A. You've seen examinees afraid of examiners. But have you ever seen an examinee who wants to kill the exam question itself? Our male lead is going to do something big today. Instead of helping out properly, Yu-hok deliberately treated the wine glasses like toys. Hunter spotted this at a glance and instantly grew agitated. He rushed up to snatch the glass from Yu-hok's hand, scolding this guest for having no sense of propriety at all. He then carefully cradled the glass and put it back in its original place. Suppressing his anger, he said, Go and bring out the knives and forks together. Yu-hok obediently went to get the knife and fork, but casually asked, Do you care especially about wine glasses? Hunter A's body stiffened for a moment, and he immediately explained, You saw it wrong. I'm devout toward every piece of tableware. Yu-hok handed over the knife and fork, turned around to leave, and only replied faintly, The next second, he casually picked up another wine glass, shook it in his hand, then looked back and added, I was just talking nonsense. I was just talking nonsense. Hunter A was so furious he exploded, and directly grabbed him and flung him out of the kitchen. Seeing his empty hands, Qianjian hurriedly asked how he'd been thrown out. Yu-hok shot a cold glance behind him and said he had changed his mind and planned to serve the dishes himself. The next second, they saw Hunter walk out with a dark expression, holding the wine glass, and he rudely cursed at Yu-hok, "Get lost." Then he carefully and neatly laid out the tableware and finally placed his hand on the shoulder of the bald man he had previously pressed into his seat and forbidden to move, picked up a portion of meat and said coldly, "It's all because of this reckless guest that I got a little angry." After speaking, he simply swallowed a piece of raw meat himself, even making crunch, crunch chewing sounds, and the fear in the room instantly grew heavier. After Hunter finished eating, his eyeballs rolled once, and he said with a mocking tone, "I accidentally ate one extra portion. So now there are only 11 portions left. That means one more of you will just have to die." Everyone was stunned. In the dead silence, Yu-hok's cold voice rang out, "That's against the rules, isn't it?" As soon as Hunter saw him, his temper flared up, and he lifted his foot, about to charge over. Yet he was tripped by Yu-hok's outstretched leg and fell flat on the spot. His whole body lurched forward, and Hunter stared fixedly at that wine glass. His eyes were full of shock, and right after that he heard a sharp crack. He crashed to the ground, and shattering along with him was that wine glass. Everyone froze where they were. The familiar crowing of a rooster sounded. "You have violated the exam requirements. The proctors Jin-gu, Ilobisa, and Gibai have been notified." Very soon, the door of the small cabin was pushed open again, and 3 familiar figures appeared. Ilobisa looked numbly at the note in his hand. "A certain examinee has broken the rules while answering." Jin-gu, cloaked in wind and snow, spoke in a smiling tone. "A certain examinee who looks well-behaved, but never learns his lesson." Yu-hok stood leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, giving Jin-gu a cold sideways glance without responding. The examinee whom the proctor had just called, "looks well-behaved," was precisely this cool, cocky boy in front of them, arms folded and leaning against the wall. Ilobisa stared at this scene in disbelief. How blind does the boss have to be to see this guy as well-behaved? He immediately looked away and said stiffly, "A certain examinee has broken the rules while answering, causing the main body of the question." Gibai added from the side, "That is, Hunter A." Ilobisa gave Hunter A quick glance. To die on the spot, this kind of situation is very rare. Gibai lifted his head, his expression solemn. "Unheard of." Mo Ilobisa was interrupted again. He held back for a moment, then continued, "We need to do an inquiry, and we'd like you to explain a few things." Number 92 nodded. "It's mainly just a few individual candidates." Officer Ilobisa closed his eyes for a moment, but still couldn't hold back his complaint. "The boss is out there attracting hatred every day, and my colleague's brain isn't quite right either." He took a breath and, face expressionless, asked, "Where is Hunter A?" Everyone quickly made way, revealing Hunter A lying on the ground. Gibai stepped forward as per standard procedure and rolled him over. Hunter A's eyes were wide open, and his face was still frozen in a look of incredulous terror. After 92 stood up, he casually wiped his hands on Mo Ilobisa's clothes. Mo Ilobisa was so angered by him that he glared, forcibly suppressing the urge to roll his eyes. He stepped forward to check. The violation notice was written very clearly. "Whoever in the room breaks the tableware will be punished." Then he confirmed with Yu-hok, "You were the one carrying it?" But Yu-hok didn't even blink and replied without missing a beat, "I lost my balance and my hand slipped." Mo Ilobisa felt that this excuse was outrageously perfunctory, yet Yu-hok turned around and questioned him instead. "Is it my rule that the tableware can't be damaged? Or is it this physically uncoordinated was he born by you?" Ilobisa's expression was cold. He had intended to find a more authoritative boss to argue with, but when he looked up, the only one beside him was Gibai. Gon noticed them freezing up and, mustering his courage, said, "The cup was dropped by Hunter A, and his death is something he brought on himself. Can you not count it as my brother's violation?" As soon as the words fell, the alarm suddenly blared. Everyone was so frightened that they immediately looked around. Gibai raised a hand and waved, signaling them not to be nervous. "It's just the system urging you to hurry up and carry out the punishment." Chen Yao raised her trembling hand at this moment, wanting to take the punishment in Yu-hok's place, but she was directly ignored by the proctors. They bypassed the crowd and walked straight up to Yu-hok, standing right in front of Boss Yu. The wrangling began, and Gibai opened his mouth with nonsense first. "I can see you've got a big problem with our boss, huh?" Yu-hok's gaze swept past Jin-gu for an instant, so fast it was like he hadn't looked at all. Gibai was still yapping, Gibisam was also yapping, and number 92 was likewise yapping. It clearly says you can't damage the tableware, and now not only is the question gone, you're also totally fine. If I were the system, I'd be exploding with rage. Yu-hok suddenly stood up, directly startling the two proctors. They became alert in an instant. What are you going to do? Yu-hok's tone was very mild. Did I ever say I would refuse the punishment? Gibarai looked speechless. Just look at the state you're in. Yu-hok only lifted his eyes slightly, as if politely reminding them, out of courtesy, I was letting you finish what you wanted to say first. Have you ever seen a test taker this eager to go be punished? The proctors were still stunned in place, not moving, while he instead looked like he couldn't wait to get to the little black room. Yu-hok walked through the crowd and was just about to go to the little black room to receive his punishment when old Yu yanked him back. My dear nephew boy, you're really going? Yu-hok didn't like being touched, but then he saw that blatant worry on old Yu's face. He held back for 2 seconds before pulling his hand away, then turned back and said flatly, I've already been in 3 times. One more doesn't make a difference. I'm just going there to get some sleep anyway. But just as he was about to open the door and leave, he was stopped by Jin-gu. He saw Jin-gu holding a long leather whip, drawling as he asked, Why are you in such a hurry? Where are you going? Yu-hok met his gaze for a moment, then suddenly spoke, To reincarnate. Coming with me? Jin-gu let out a low laugh, then had another proctor tell Yu-hok what the specific punishment was this time. Ilobisa pulled out yet another slip of paper, leaving Gibarai stunned. Just how many slips of paper did he bring? He then announced in a grave tone, if the same examinee violates the rules 3 times in a single exam, they will be listed as a special subject, with a proctor shadowing them at all times for close monitoring. Tien added, in addition, that examinee will be deprived of 1 chance to make a choice. The room fell dead silent at once. Yu-hok frowned. Are you kidding me? Jin-gu made a pleased gesture at him, so polite it was unsettling. There were still 36 hours and 24 minutes left before the exam. We still have to live together for another day and a half, and we've already brought all our luggage. Why don't you open the door and see? Yu-hok pulled the door open with a backward tug and saw 2 suitcases neatly placed at the doorway. Yu-hok was utterly speechless. 36 hours. This isn't getting some sleep. This is sleeping so damn long he won't even wake up at dawn. Jin-gu's low voice sounded again, as if reminding and also urging. Say 1 more sentence. There are 24 minutes left before the next collection of papers. After speaking, he walked toward Yu-hok, preventing a rule-breaking examinee from forcibly continuing the exam as his excuse. He raised the leather whip in his hand. He twisted Yu-hok's hands behind his back and neatly tied them. Standing behind him, Jin-gu held his shoulders, lowered his head close and said, This is a return gift for that bucket of blood. Do you like it? This proctor actually wanted to tie the examinee to the bed for real. Holding the other end of the whip, he directly dragged the person up to the attic. But as soon as they entered the room, a sour, moldy stench made him cover his nose. Yet he still stubbornly insisted he was going to tie him to the bed. He reached out and shook the bedpost. When he turned his head, he saw that mutual destruction expression on Yu-hok's face, cold as if he had finally waited for his chance. He clicked his tongue, let out a low laugh and admitted, All right, it really isn't very clean. The next second, he tightened the whip in his hand, forcibly pulling the distance between them shut. The place is only this big. What do you want me to do? Yu-hok's face was cold, his tone impatient to the extreme. I want you to lie on that bed yourself, put the rope around your own neck, and then hand the other end to me. All I'd have to do is give it a tug, and everything would be nice and quiet. Would that be okay? Jin-gu narrowed his eyes. He had originally thought Yu-hok would lose his temper, but instead the other actually smiled. I'm afraid not. I don't have that kind of fetish. In his heart, Yu-hok cursed coldly. Lunatic. In the end, Yu-hok sat on the floor, tied to the pillar that supported the roof. Jin-gu pushed open the only window, and a blast of cold air rushed in. He asked, Cold? Yu-hok couldn't be bothered to respond to him. On a heavy snow day like this, if it's not cold, is it supposed to be hot? But every now and then, the stale stench in the room became even more unbearable. Yu-hok skipped his question entirely and just asked if he could stand up. Jin-gu lazily replied, No, your legs are too long. You might kick me in the face. It's more stable if you stay lying down. Stable, my ass. Having been pissed off twice in a row, Yu-hok simply turned his head away and stopped paying attention to him. Through the glass, he stared at the chaotic mess of people downstairs. Yu-mun was holding a knife, leaning against the wall, as if in a dying struggle. Leo said she had switched to liberal arts in college. She'd forgotten the details and only remembered the most basic refraction diagram. Looking like a little puppy, Yu-mun said they could add whatever they wanted. Anyway, a dead horse could only be treated like a living one. Yu-yo took the knife and casually drew a couple of lines, And when Yumun saw it, his heart jolted. Is it really this simple? And yet I still couldn't think of it. Yumun hurriedly turned to ask the others, does anyone else remember anything? Only after looking closely did he realize that the two old grannies probably didn't even know what physics was. A patient and a yellow-haired kid. There was even less hope to be had from those two. The bald man? Forget it. It'd be a blessing if he didn't go crazy. There was also an old man with two children who looked like they were only in elementary school. Then there was old Yu, who saw nothing but alcohol. And finally, there was a foreigner who might not even understand Chinese. After looking around the whole circle, Yumun was left with nothing but despair in his heart. He lifted his eyes to look toward the attic, with no idea what Jin-gu had done to his brother. At this moment, Giberai suddenly popped out, forcibly cutting off Yumun's gloom. They only heard him remind them, there are only 5 minutes left before you have to hand in your papers. Ilobisa found a spot in the corner of the room and sat there properly. Giberai dragged his suitcase and walked a circle around. In the end, he still squeezed onto Ilobisa's sofa. Ilobisa looked completely puzzled. Isn't the boss in the attic? Do you want him to carry the suitcase up by himself? Giberai pulled a bitter face. Neither of those two are easy to deal with. I don't want to go up there for now. He counted on his fingers and sighed. I've been invigilating exams for 3 years, and if you add the time when I was a candidate myself, I've never seen examinees this lawless. He thought Ilobisa would follow along and complain with him, but instead Ilobisa fell silent for a while before saying, You have. Giberai was stunned. Who? When? Ilobisa lifted his chin a little, motioning toward the attic. Giberai was blank for a few seconds before he reacted. How could I forget Jin-gu? Come to think of it, he really had never asked what kind of feats the boss had pulled off in the past. Just as this thought surfaced, it was cut off directly by Ilobisa. Afraid you'll die too fast, so you'd better not ask. As for the past, even the boss himself doesn't remember. He'd heard that the system had once had an accident and accidentally injured him, so he forgot a part of it. There's such a thing? How come I didn't know? Ilobisa said expressionlessly. Because the only thing in your head is food. Meanwhile, in the attic, the snow outside the window was still falling heavily, yet not a single lamp was lit inside the room. Yu-hok silently watched the scene downstairs, his earring occasionally flashing for an instant at a certain angle. Jin-gu stared at him for a while, then suddenly spoke. Have I seen you before? After the words fell, there was a brief pause. Yu-hok turned back to look at him. No, even if you had, I'm afraid only one of us would still be alive. Jin-gu propped his chin and thought for a moment, then actually nodded. That's a bit of a shame, but it does kind of seem that way. As they were speaking, a creak came from the attic side. In the next second, Ilobisa stuck his head out. The boss is about to collect the papers. Are you going in? Jin-gu's tone was very casual. How are they doing? I saw a little brat whose hand never stopped moving. Giberai's voice followed immediately. Useless. I didn't look carefully, but if you can score points writing like that, I'll behead myself on the spot in celebration. When the collection time arrived, the sound of a rooster crowing rang out in the room right on time, and when it crowed the 9th time, the little leather whip in Yu-hok's hand was finally undone. After the several proctors went upstairs, what came next was the system's grading time. Everyone crowded together, eyes closed, waiting for the judgment to descend. As time passed second by second, anxiety kept swelling in the air. Jixiang stared at that densely covered wall, and Right Look also stared at that densely covered wall. Exine Dao muttered under his breath, I have to step on one of the points. It's already been 1 minute. I also started to get nervous. Could it be that there are too many words and the system got stuck? On the wall, 2 red dots were circled. One labeled refractive index, 1 point. The other was that simple schematic diagram, 2 points. As soon as Zhao Yang finished speaking, the wall began to change, and all the other useless information whooshed away in an instant. Then a line of red text popped up. Bonus item, 1 death out of 13 people. 6 points. Additional item. All candidates survive, 2 points. Total for this round, 11 points. The people in the small room were quiet for quite a while. The next second, a scream exploded. Fuck, I thought we were dead for sure. Yumun yelled straight at Yu-hok in excitement. Bro, I got 1 point. Did you see that? Even the invigilator was dumbfounded and couldn't help complaining. Has the system gone crazy? You kill off the exam question and still get extra points for it. He immediately glared at Yu-hok behind him, the big shot who had been tied up for 20 minutes, and with 1 kick single-handedly took 8 points. Yu-hok finished coolly watching his expression and stretched a hand toward him. Bring your head here, let's celebrate. Bring your head here. Let's offer it as a gift. The system probably also felt it was being ridiculous and added another line. paper score -2 points, total 9 points. So the hard-writing student Yumun ended up with a total score of -1. Just as everyone was still excited, the question changed again, and the 12 sets of cutlery no longer competed with each other. But the secret hidden in the cutlery was still there, sitting in the shadows. Could that be the one who is to be cursed? Cursed. Key point: optics. Find that set of special tableware, but do not damage it. Exam knowledge point: optics. With one move, the man scored an 8 out of 10, with an overall score of 11. Everyone thought this bizarre exam was finally over. But then the question on the wall refreshed again. The test was still going. And while everyone else still couldn't believe it and huddled together, Yu-hok only gave the tableware a faint glance. Staring at the newly updated question, everyone was still in a daze when a shrill sound suddenly exploded in the room. Like nails scraping across a wooden board, it instantly made everyone's hair stand on end. In panic, they looked around in all directions. The bald man sitting on the chair broke down on the spot, crying and screaming, "Behind me! Right behind my back! Help!" Everyone snapped their heads around to look, only to find that behind the bald man there was absolutely nothing. When the bald man heard this, he cried even harder instead, as if he had completely lost control. No one dared to go near him. They could only shout for him to come over first. But the bald man was so terrified his legs went weak. He couldn't move at all, and even felt as if that chair was dragging him back. When the others heard that, their hearts turned cold. Could it be that once you sat in this chair, you could never leave? The bald man was so panicked he was talking nonsense, sobbing so hard he was gasping for breath. "Why yes, I can't leave. He wants me dead. He wants me dead." After hearing that, the others were even more afraid to interfere, and all took half a step back in unison. Yu-hok, however, walked over there alone, and Yumun was startled and was just about to reach out to grab his brother. But in the next second he remembered, he himself had tried his best and still got docked 1 point, while his brother had casually kicked once and scored 8 points. Yumun suddenly felt it was safer to cling to his brother, so he hurried to catch up and called, "Bro, wait for me." When they walked around to the back of that chair, they finally found the source of the sound. It turned out something was carving words, while Boss Yu stood there with his arms folded, just waiting for it to finish. In the end, what was carved was a single number. Right after that, the other chairs also began to emit harsh scraping sounds one after another, until all the chairs had numbers carved into them, from 1 to 12. Yumun looked at the 12 chairs, then at the 12 sets of tableware and quietly guessed, "The chairs correspond to the tableware numbers. As long as we find the set of cursed tableware at the special table spot, we just need to write the number on the answer wall, right?" But all the answers we got marked earlier were related to refraction. So for this step of finding the tableware, do we also have to use refraction? Everyone thought it made sense as soon as they heard it. But then those two old ladies asked something that instantly made Yumun break down. "What is refraction?" Yumun mentally cracked on the spot. Seeing him completely stuck like that, Yu couldn't help but burst out laughing. She turned around, forced down her temper, and patiently explained to the elderly what exactly refraction means. Yumun snapped out of it, and when he looked up, he saw Yu-hok spacing out. He followed Yu-hok's line of sight, and there were those 3 haunting invigilators again. He even stupidly asked, "Why are you staring at the invigilators?" The next second, he met Yu-hok's cold, lofty gaze, and immediately chickened out. "Just looking around, I won't ask. Have you ever seen chairs write their own numbers? In this little wooden cabin, the more absurd something is, the more it seems like a rule. The more absurd something is, the more it seems like a rule." Everyone stood in a circle around the dining table, but no one dared to sit, because once you sat down, you couldn't get back up, and the tableware was laid out right on the table. The yellow-haired guy asked cautiously, "Can we touch these plates? Will picking one up count as choosing a seat?" The old fellow was even more careful. "Let's not touch them. What if a single touch means instant death?" Just as he said that, they saw Yu-hok beside them already raising his hand to pick up a goblet. Old Gon was so startled that his expression changed. Ho, how are you this bold? What if picking up the cup also counts as you having chosen an answer?" Yu-hok's tone was very calm. "I already picked one up in the kitchen." Old Yu was choked speechless for a moment. "You're pretty proud of yourself, huh?" At this moment, Yumun rushed over and directly pushed him aside. Then he picked up all the knives and forks, spoons and plates, checking through them one by one. But no matter how he looked, they were just ordinary tableware. He turned back, even more puzzled. Why was Yu-hok only looking at the cups? Yu-hok set upright the wine glass he had been toying with in his hand for a long time. "No need to look at the others." Yumun froze. "No need? What do you mean by that?" Ignoring the crowd's complaints, he turned and left the dining table. He walked straight over to Hunter A's corpse and crouched down. He reached out and picked up a shard of glass, turning it over and over in his hands. Back in the kitchen, he had already noticed that Hunter A was particularly concerned about the wine glasses, and after Hunter A smashed one of the glasses, the puzzle immediately prompted. There were only 12 sets of tableware left. Yumun paused for a few seconds, then suddenly caught on. He got so worked up that he shouted, "Bro, I get it. Only the cups count as tableware, the rest are fake. So the secret must be hidden in the cups." When immediately hyped it up. "Don't look at anything else. Just focus on the cups." Everyone hurried to try, breathing on them, warming them with their hands, shaking them, turning them over front and back, but still couldn't see anything wrong. On the sofa on the other side, the three proctors were also dragging things out at the front. Gibarai hugged his arms and complained, "I'm kind of desperate and I'm hungry, proctoring the whole time. Is it really this exhausting?" Publicly, Ilobisa said with a blank face, "It's still early. There are 36 hours left." Only Jin-gu kept his eyes fixed on Yu-hok's side. When the others said they were going to get food, he didn't react at all. Yu-hok had his back to him, head lowered as he examined the shattered wine glass, even the curve of his shoulders and back looking especially attractive. Jin-gu lowered his gaze and watched for a long time, then suddenly asked, "Have you seen him before?" The two of them were stunned. "Who?" That reaction already said it all. After a moment's pause, Jin-gu asked again, "Then what about Jin-gu?" Ilobisa stared at the examinees for a while longer, then suddenly seemed to be enlightened and understood what Jin-gu had meant by that earlier sentence. He didn't say a word, just looked at his own boss like that, staring for almost a full minute. Jin-gu finally spoke. "Am I dead? You're staring at me like you're keeping vigil over a corpse." Ilobisa pondered for a while, then said, "If he'd seen us before, he should have recognized us long ago." Jin-gu glanced at Yu-hok again and answered softly, He then lowered his eyes. Ilobisa was right. If they really had met, it wouldn't be this kind of reaction. And you wouldn't casually see some person and, like me, be missing a chunk of your memory. At this moment, Gibar-I was holding the beef he was about to take to barbecue when he suddenly let out a terrified roar. "Bro, don't do anything rash." The three proctors followed the sound and looked over. Our gaming big shot's hand speed was so fast it left afterimages, and he slammed the bottom of the cup he'd taken from Hunter hard against the table edge, snapping off another piece of the cup bottom on the spot. Giba's hand shook, and beef juice splashed all over himself. With a wooden face, he asked Ilobisa, "Fourth bro, if someone violates the rules, can we just directly recruit him as a colleague? I don't want to proctor him anymore." Ilobisa pinched the bridge of his nose, truly at his wit's end. But Jin-gu only watched this scene with a faint smile. What do you do when you run into a candidate who's rebellious to the core? You tell him he can't damage the tableware, and he immediately turns around and smashes the cup bottom. Old Yu was so scared his face went pale and his hair stood on end. But Yu-hok only replied lightly, "I know what I'm doing." As soon as he said that, Proctor Giba-I froze on the spot, still holding the meal box. "Search your conscience and tell me, what do you know you're doing?" Someone who treats rule-breaking like a daily meal, and he still has the nerve to say, "I know what I'm doing?" Has he no shame? Even the air in the room seemed to get stuck. Everyone felt that Yu-hok had violated the rules again. But after a few minutes, the exam wall flashed red, then white, flickering red and white several times in a row, and in the end nothing happened. Covering his face, Gibarai sighed on the side, feeling like the system was about to be driven insane by him. And just then, the gaming big shot broke the silence first, handing the cup bottom in his hand to Yumun so he could confirm whether anything was hidden in it. Then he rubbed his eyes as he said that his eyes felt uncomfortable. Yumun held the broken cup segment in his palm, his whole body going numb. "Bro, breaking tableware counts as a violation." Yu-hok's tone was very flat. "Which of your eyes saw me break it?" Yumun stood there stunned, holding the glass, with only one thought left in his mind. Could it be that I'm blind? Yu-hok seemed to be restraining his temper as he explained. "The problem says there are currently 12 sets of tableware. Can you count or not? Do you want me to teach you?" Yumun suddenly snapped out of it. Right, the problem spelled it out very clearly. The 12 sets of tableware were neatly arranged on the table, so this shattered one didn't count as part of them at all. Gonwin instantly came back to life on the spot and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Bro, you're basically my dad," which infuriated old Yu, and also infuriated old Gon. Just as he was about to let him understand what the weight of fatherly love meant, Gonwin suddenly howled, "There's something at the bottom of the cup." Everyone immediately crowded around. They saw him twist himself by sheer force into a spider-like posture and shout, "From this angle, there really is something." The blonde guy snapped right then and there and yelled at him, "Can't you just say what you see directly?" Gonwin shot back at once. "If I could see it clearly, Would I have twisted myself up like this? At that moment, Yu-hok, who had been resting with his eyes closed for a while, suddenly spoke and told him to bring it over so he could look. Big boss, you had spoken. Wu Wenda hurriedly handed it over, even pointing out which angle you had to look from to see it. From how it felt, it was like a picture, but it was horribly blurry, and the words couldn't be made out. Yu-hok only responded with a brief then flipped his hand and knocked the bottom of the glass against the edge of the table again. Gone when scalp went numb the instant he heard that clang. Yu-hok pinched the tiny bit of glass that was left, and from the joint at the bottom of the cup, he shook out a slip of paper. Gone one, as if serving an ancestor, held out both hands to receive it carefully. The next second, his eyes lit up at once. There was something on it, a sentence in English. The foreigner lowered his voice and read the sentence out. After the few old ladies listened, their faces were full of regret. Someone in the crowd murmured, "The Last Supper." The blonde guy was instantly annoyed. "Who are you cursing?" The sickly guy hurried to explain, "I mean Da Vinci's painting. It's called The Last Supper." Afraid the blonde would ask, "Who's Da Vinci?" he immediately turned his head to Yu-hok. "What's written on this little slip is the name of one of the 12 apostles in the painting. Inside an ordinary wine glass, there was actually a clue hidden that could decide Guan Ping's life or death. Boss, you still had his old style." He directly smashed the bottom of the glass. Again, sure enough, another small slip of paper drifted out of the cup. And that sickly guy who'd always had almost no presence suddenly pointed out, "This corresponds to one of the 12 apostles in the famous painting The Last Supper." Yumun immediately looked over with the adoration of a bad student for a top kid. "You can even recite all 12 apostles?" The sickly guy had barely said a few words before he started coughing. After a moment's pause, he finally said, he had studied fine arts and just happened to know a bit. The 12 apostles just happened to correspond to 12 sets of cutlery. When you talk about the Last Supper, that equals 12 guests. Even the two elementary schoolers could blurt out one name. Yumun and Yuyo immediately followed and shouted, "Yeah, Judas." Judas was one of Jesus's 12 disciples, and also the most famous traitor in the world. The answer was practically right in front of them. Yumun felt like he could even smell it, and he was just about to roll up his sleeves and start carving the letters. But at the very instant he was about to act, he suddenly realized this didn't seem to be about writing a name. What the question wanted was the number of the tableware set. So they had to find the set of tableware that hid Judas's cup, and they couldn't damage the cup. As soon as the blondie heard this, he instantly grabbed a cup, eyes shining, and started turning it over and over to look. But no matter how he looked, the slip of paper inside the cup seemed to have vanished. From the side, Yumun snapped at him. They had already checked the cups before. "If you could see it at a glance, would we have dragged it out until now? The problem is, we can't damage the cup." Thinking of that earlier question where they scored points, Yumun's mind suddenly lit up. Refraction. That earlier scoring question really had been all about refraction. The slip of paper being hidden in the cup and not visible meant the angle of refraction was wrong. Yumun explained this haltingly, forcing himself to gesture it out for everyone. Yu-hok watched expressionlessly as this idiot Yumun waved his arms around. In the blink of an eye, he noticed that several proctors had already set up a grill and were barbecuing beef over there. And that Jin-gu, just sitting there, made him feel like someone displaying fresh meat. Yu-hok pulled his gaze back. He lifted his foot and walked over to Hunter A, and with one yank, tore away the bunch of keys hanging at his waist. Ignoring the others behind him, he went straight into the kitchen. Hunter A talked a good game, saying there had to be wine. But after searching all around the kitchen, the only liquid was the blood pooled on the floor. Yu-hok turned and left the kitchen. This outcome actually proved even more that the harder something was to find, the more crucial it was. Holding the keys, he walked up to another door that had never been opened before. The answer was right here. As soon as the dusty room door opened, a burst of powdery dust rushed out, and Yu-hok raised his hand to cover the tip of his nose. Then he saw that, in the middle of the empty room, there stood only a single lonely wooden rack, with a bottle of wine resting on it at an angle. Yu-hok picked up the bottle and walked out. "Found it." Everyone immediately crowded around him. Only then did Yumun belatedly chime in, Right, add water, refraction, now I remember." Ignoring him, Yu-hok twisted open the cap, and in the next second, the aroma of the wine filled the entire little house. The wine slowly flowed into the glass, and at the bottom of the glass, a name gradually floated up. Everyone squeezed around the table, staring fixedly at the glass. After the sick man finished reading, his eyes lit up. As expected, that's right, it's the Last Supper. Old Yu, a hopeless drunk, eagerly leaned in too. But the moment he caught the smell, he instantly backed away in disgust, muttering, "This wine is really awful." Holding the wine, Yu-hok moved with steady hands, filling each glass to the brim one by one. Number 3. Everyone held their breath and watched, afraid to miss any name at the bottom of the glasses. By the time it reached number 10, only Judas and Jesus still hadn't appeared. Barely containing their excitement, they shouted, "Hurry up and pour number 11. The answer was about to be revealed. The bald man sitting at seat number 12 was already so scared that his whole body was trembling. If number 11 still wasn't Judas, then the name would fall into his cup, and he would die. The bald man was so afraid he was about to throw up, but even after having seen blood and flesh flying in the interrogation room, he had never felt this suffocated. After all, that blood and flesh belonged to other people. Suddenly, a cheer exploded beside him. "Judas! Judas! Number 11 has Judas's name. Judas!" The bald man was stunned for a few seconds. Then his whole body collapsed into the chair, as if he had just snatched back his life. Yu-man handed the knife to the sickly man. The sickly man took a deep breath and raised his hand, about to carve his number on it. Halfway through carving, however, Yu-hok grabbed his hand and pressed it down. Yu-hok stood by his side, his tone icily cold. "No, that's wrong. It's not 11, it's 12. Because in the Last Supper, the one who was ultimately nailed to the cross was Jesus. Judas was only the traitor." As he spoke, he took the knife, and with a swift motion of his hand, quickly carved out a 2. Once he finished carving, he set the knife down with a crisp clack. At that moment, the radio suddenly crackled, and everyone turned to look in unison. They heard a voice coming from the radio. "Correct answer. The examinee has submitted the paper early. The exam is over. Await final punishment and reward." Everyone stared blankly at the exam wall. It's over? There were still chances for extra bonus or penalty points. The scores surfaced on the wall, but the first 2 sub-questions were actually marked as score unknown. Everyone started arguing all at once, but no matter how they argued, they couldn't reach a conclusion. But they all still let out a sigh of relief. Being able to stay alive was already more than they could hope for. The information on the wall was still refreshing. They had spent more than 35 hours less than the average time. To be precise, 35 hours 22 minutes and 11 seconds. And their score was 11 points higher than the average. Yu-man lowered his voice beside him and said to Yu-hok, "By this calculation, the average duration must be 48 hours. Miss Ilobisa couldn't listen anymore, and Mr. Ilobisa couldn't listen anymore either, and directly spoke up. 48 hours is very normal. You two are way too full of yourselves. Not to mention that in these 12 hours, you still have to deduct a certain examinee's 3 hours of sleep and 3 hours of cleaning. In other words, not counting the time in solitary confinement, a certain examinee could finish the exam in less than 6 hours. Is that even human?" And this not human Yu-hok even received 2 draws of the lottery as a reward. But he still hadn't figured out what exactly the lottery right was. In the suddenly empty little wooden cabin came a ding-dong sound, like a message had arrived, and everyone looked around in confusion. All of a sudden, Yu-hok felt a hand reaching toward him, and he instinctively turned his head to look. That hand was pinching a stack of cards, stopping beside his cheek, and extending straight toward him. His expression darkened instantly, and his voice turned cold. "You again?" Jin-gu's tone was still that same careless one. "You recognized me just by seeing this hand?" Hearing this made Yu-hok's anger shoot straight up. He couldn't hold back either, and raised his hand to strike backward hard. Jin-gu twisted his body to the side and dodged it easily, yet he acted as if nothing had happened, smiling as he opened the paper box in his hand, casually reminding him, "Sneak attacks don't work on me. Draw first." After speaking, he spread the cards out, and as soon as everyone heard this, they immediately crowded around. They saw that the cards were filled with tempting rewards, total score plus 10, as well as individual total score plus 15, all members total score plus 10%, overall total score plus 5%, and even more outrageous ones, cheat sheet, outstanding examinee, model student, top of the class. In a place like this, it really made no sense. What was the point of having these things that looked like certificates of merit? Yu-hok, however, noticed a few almost completely black cards, and his heart sank. Could these be punishments? Jin-gu drew out a black card and explained, "It doesn't count as a punishment, but it's not a normal reward either. One black card represents one examination system reform, which takes effect immediately on that day." After hearing this, the faces of the few young people all turned pale. They had already endured the college entrance exam, so how could they still not escape reforms? Just then, Jin-gu tilted the cardboard box again and shook out a card that had been missed. He held it between his fingertips and said with a trace of a smile in his tone, "This one, you should really like." There were only 2 large characters on the front of the card. direct admission. The onlookers went silent for a few seconds, and in the next second, a burst of loud discussion exploded. The sickly-looking guy was the first to get excited. Is it what I think it means? That is, no need to take exams. Before Jin-gu had time to speak, Gibarai cut in first. His eyes lit up as he excitedly began to introduce the direct admission card. In this deck, this is the only trump card. Drawing it is equivalent to directly passing all the exams. Eat well, sleep well, close your eyes. Next time you open them, you'll be going home. The crowd exploded in an instant. The words "go home" were like hooks, dragging out every examinee's deepest longing. But not everyone could get a guaranteed admission card. Laugon braced himself and asked, "Without this card, how long will it take us to go back?" Gibai thought for a moment and gave a rather uncertain answer. It depends on the exam system in place at the time. In any case, you have to finish all the required subjects, and your scores still have to meet the standard. No sooner had he finished speaking than Jin-gu, over there, was already shuffling the cards, slow and unhurried, as if he were just playing a game. He turned the cards face down, pinched them with his fingertips, and fanned them out. He said to Yu-hok, "Come on, you get 2 chances." But Yu-hok's face was expressionless. He stared at that row of cards, not moving in the slightest. Someone who almost violated the rules 4 times ends up getting the highest score in the end. And on top of that, he's rewarded with 2 extra chances to draw. Invigilator Jin-gu pushed the cards right up in front of him, but Yu-hok only kept a cold face, turned his head, and asked the crowd, "Whose luck is good?" Jin-gu met his gaze, still smiling, but deliberately refused to answer. The next second, the radio blared a warning. Examinees may not transfer their drawing rights. After Yu-hok heard it, his face instantly darkened to pitch black. Jin-gu lifted his chin a little and urged him, annoyingly, "The system already warned you? Why are you glaring at me? Don't scare people with that face, hurry up and draw." Yu-hok kept a cold face and stared at him for a good few seconds. "To hell with your scare people with that face." The next second, he moved suddenly, with heavy, harsh force, and yanked out a card. Everyone around who hadn't drawn a card yet was so nervous they couldn't stand it. They all crowded in at once. Yu-hok flipped the card over to look at the front. Only this was clearly written on it: "Among the top ranks, hereby commended." At the same time, the radio sounded, "One draw right has been used." The corners of Jin-gu's mouth lifted in a faint smile. "Not bad. One more time." Yu-hok's face remained expressionless as he drew another card, while the onlookers were even more nervous, whispering prayers, hoping it wouldn't be another encouragement card. Yu-hok flipped it open and saw, "Invigilator's assistants may make one additional request to the invigilator, valid until the end of the next exam." After reading it, Yu-hok asked coldly, "Is the invigilator fixed for each session?" While putting away the cards, Jin-gu replied, "Of course not. Every time a session starts, it will refresh at random." The radio dutifully sounded again. "BZZ, you have used the draw right twice in total. BZZ, drawing ends. BZZ." The announcement finished. New words creaked onto the wall again, and everyone looked over in disbelief. They recognized every single character, but put together, no one could understand them. It read, "Punishment. One guest has sat in the cursed seat. He has evaded death and will become the new Hunter A." Before the crowd could recover, a shrill scream suddenly exploded, and everyone stiffly turned their necks, forcing themselves to look over. They saw the bald man in seat 12 with his eyes wide open, staring at his own hands in terror. His original skin tone was rapidly fading away. He turned his body stiffly. At this moment, he was looking more and more like the dead Hunter A. They only heard him murmur, "No, it can't be like this. Stay with me, stay with me." Speaking, he suddenly lunged fiercely at the crowd. "You can't leave!" When a sallow, green-faced bald man suddenly charges at you, screaming, "You can't leave." What does that feel like in that instant? Yu-hok and the others were experiencing it firsthand. But at that critical moment, with everything hanging by a thread, a gust of wind and snow somehow swept in from nowhere. Yu-hok stepped in front of everyone in one stride, instinctively raising a hand to shield his face. When he opened his eyes again, the small wooden cabin before his eyes was gone, and the bald man who had turned into Huntera had disappeared as well, vanished along with the 3 proctors. The good news was, the wind and snow falling on their bodies finally no longer caused harm. They supported one another and walked up the mountain along that faint, barely visible path. Everyone's face looked terrible, half from being terrified by the bald man turning into Hunter A, and half from being frozen nearly to death. After more than half an hour, a slanting boundary steel finally appeared by the roadside, with the front engraved, at the foot of Rooster's Cry Mountain. It probably referred to that rooster crowing cabin where they had just taken the exam. Then where was the mountain from just now? Shivering, Yumun huddled closer to look. The other side read 100 meters ahead, and yet another side also read 100 meters ahead. But the characters after that were buried by snow. He tried scraping at it with his foot, but no matter what he did, he couldn't clear it. The sickly man was so frozen he seemed about to stop breathing, and stammered, "Don't tell me. We just survived one round, and there's a new one coming? Isn't this forcing people to their deaths?" Everyone stood by the boundary steel, so tense in their silence that no one dared take another step forward. Only Yu-hok strode straight ahead, tossing back a line. "Not enough people have died yet?" The crowd looked at one another for a few seconds. Hurriedly, they immediately rushed to catch up with his steps. Finally, in the hazy white mist, they saw the outline of some houses. Only when they got closer did they see the sign on the door, "Lodging and dining." It was actually an inn. Everyone's eyes were full of longing, but their legs felt weak, and no one dared to step forward first. Just as they were hesitating, they saw that Yu-hok had already walked over and directly pushed the door open. By this moment, Yu-hok had long been starving. Stepping in the snow, with every step he regretted more and more having handed in his paper too early. If he had delayed just a few more minutes, the sizzling grilled beef would have been ready. It was all that eye-catching Jin-gu's fault, ruining the meal that was almost in his mouth. Yu-hok's expression grew even colder. He lifted a hand to touch his earring, then lifted his foot and stepped into the inn. The receptionist looked up and was just about to greet them, but when he saw the funeral face of the person who had come in, he was so scared that he could barely speak clearly. He hurriedly craned his neck toward the back room and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Boss, we've got guests! Boss, we've got guests!" From inside came a woman's sharp and brash voice at once. "You calling ghosts? There are guests. Can't you greet them yourself?" The young man at the front desk hunched his neck and replied in a low voice, "I'm afraid if I greet them, they'll just run away." Right after that, a short-haired woman came out carrying a kitchen knife. In this godforsaken place, where could they possibly run? You tell me. Guests come to stay at the inn, and the lady boss comes out to welcome them with a kitchen knife? Staring at the gleaming knife in the lady boss's hand, the receptionist shuddered in fright. "Boss, what are you doing with that?" Even Yu-hok froze for half a second. The lady boss seemed to only just react. She lowered her head to glance at the kitchen knife and dryly explained, "I didn't feel like eating at the canteen today, so I planned to cook a bit myself. Come in quickly." As she spoke, she turned her head to look at Yu-hok and gave a smile. "Yo, handsome guy, just finished the exam?" Little, who immediately straightened the registration book, with the boss backing him up, front desk whose confidence returned as well. "Freezing to death. Freezing to death. He was freezing to death," he said to them. "Freezing to death, report your names. Freezing to death, let me see how many days you'll be staying. Let me see how many days you'll be staying." Old Yu had just pushed the door open and was rubbing his hands that were numb from the cold when he heard this sentence. His expression changed instantly. "How do you know we just finished our exam?" The boss raised his brows with a smile. This question was actually fresh to him. He lifted the kitchen knife and tapped it against the wall. "Please take a look at that line of words, will you?" On that wall, the words were written very clearly, several large characters. "Examinee's rest area." Everyone's faces looked even worse. They had originally thought they had already walked out long ago. The boss was not surprised at all. "Feels like you're not far from entering the city, right? That's normal. It's your first time in a rest area, isn't it?" Everyone's like this. Old Chen asked, "What do you mean? See how many days we'll be staying. Isn't it that we can stay as many days as we want?" The boss smiled even more cruelly. "Dream on. The number of rest days is regulated. It's not however long you want to stay." As he spoke, he even shook the kitchen knife. Old Tua said, "Enough. Stop wasting time. Hurry up and report your names." At this moment, Yellow Hair immediately refused to accept it when he heard this. Damn it, this was obviously a store that wanted people's lives. "Whoever wants to stay can stay. I'm leaving." Who knew the lady boss was even more ruthless. She raised her hand and drove the kitchen knife straight into the front desk counter. She pointed at the blonde-haired guy with her other hand. "Get lost. If you stay, you're a wimp." The blonde-haired guy pulled his collar tight, clenched his teeth, and turned to walk out the door. The rest of them crowded at the doorway, stuck between staying and leaving. Yu-hok couldn't be bothered to watch this farce. He tapped the table to snap the front desk guy back to attention, then gave his name. Xiao, who hurriedly rattled away at the keyboard, then looked up and said, "Found it. This time you have a total of 7 days off." He glanced at the time on the wall, 3:12 in the afternoon. Then Xiao, who handed Yu-hok a room card. Yu-hok took it, lowered his head, and glanced at it. Oh right, on the front of the card it said, Room 404. The lady boss added from the side, "We don't do number taboos here. Not staying in a room with a for in it doesn't mean you won't die in the exam, right?" Everyone fell into an awkward silence. Thanks so much for that. Yu-hok didn't even lift his head and flipped another page. On it were written things like Operator Cho-woo, exam subjects, cumulative scores, and so on. At that moment, the boss, Cho-woo, glanced over in mild surprise. "You scored 19 points in a single subject? Wouldn't have guessed." Yu-hok finally raised his head and gave her a cold look. She wasn't fazed by his gaze at all. Still grinning, she said, "I'm complimenting you." With that, she drew out the banyan knife and headed to the kitchen in high spirits. Only Xiao, who was left at the front desk, dutifully reciting the script. "Hot water and heating are fully available. Blah blah blah. Meals are served punctually at 7, 11, and 5, each lasting 2 hours. Miss it and there's no makeup." After listening, Yu-hok just nodded, then asked, "Got anything to eat?" As soon as he finished, Xiao, who had just said a whole bunch, suddenly pulled a very strange face and replied. Yu-hok stopped talking and just stared at him like that, being stared at until he couldn't take it. Xiao, who turned his head and shouted loudly. 17 to 1900 hours, the clearly stated canteen opening hours, had already passed. But with just one look from Boss Yu, the guy at the front desk, almost in tears, went to call the boss. In the end, Boss Chu really did cook for them, just because in this group of examinees there was a Yu-hok. A plate of steaming hot dumplings, hand-wrapped by him, was brought to the table. Boss Yu had been hungry all day, and now his mind was filled with only one word: eat. Holding a glass of beer, Cho-woo slowly looked over at them. They casually started chatting about this group, and Gonwon found it truly absurd. The group that came yesterday had only 3 people, and they didn't go out at all the whole time. Even when eating, they just took a couple of bites, and that was it. With a shocked look, Gonwon asked, what were they being tested on? When they went in, how many went in together? Drinking as he answered, Cho-woo said, "The ones who've been staying here lately are all taking the same session. Each group has at most 5 or 6 people." As soon as Yu-mun heard this, he was so scared that his dumpling fell. The image of that bald guy who turned into Hunter flashed through his mind, and goosebumps instantly crawled all over his body. "Doesn't that mean Hunter as are everywhere?" Smiling, Cho-woo corrected him. "That's not what I mean, it's the same exam hall. You have to wait till they finish and leave before the next group can go in." Only then did Gonwon pick the dumpling back up from the table with his chopsticks. But Cho-woo seemed to think things still weren't exciting enough. He hooked up the corners of his mouth and kept adding fuel to the fire. "Do you know, in some exam rooms, you can still find traces left by previous candidates." As he spoke, he put down his wine glass and lowered his voice. "I heard last time that someone picked up a section of a finger bone, and someone else picked up a ring." He propped his chin on his hand, his gaze holding an indescribable meaning. "You can give it a try too." Early the next morning, after a night, everyone had just barely gotten used to this resting place. Yu-mun could only comfort himself like this. "At least you won't die the instant you go out. The endurance of human beings is really terrifying." Everyone found that there was a room opposite the resting place, with a wooden sign hanging on the door, Kangmai. The 2 little girls asked what that was, and Olju explained. "It just means general store. That's what they call it where he's from, too." After hearing that, everyone decided to go in and have a look around. As soon as they went in, they discovered the shop was filled with smoke, and the shopkeeper was a heavy smoker. The sickly man had barely stepped inside when he started coughing non-stop. Olju wanted to play the fellow townsman card and go up to strike up a conversation, but was coldly cut off by the man. "Being from the same place is useless here. For all you know, you'll be dead tomorrow." With that, he lit another cigarette and said coldly, "Click. If you're buying, then buy. If not, get out." Olju could only swallow his words in embarrassment. But the shop really had everything: clothes and pants, pots and pans. It was actually quite complete, with internal and external medicines for injuries and bruises. What a supermarket has, it has. What a supermarket may not have, it also has. Everyone hurried to grab shopping carts, and the layer of dust on the carts made them cough straight away. But no one could bear to pass up the chance to shop. Very soon they discovered that not a single item had a price tag. The sickly-looking man was holding several boxes of anti-inflammatory painkillers, and when he heard this he said, "Isn't this just like a tourist attraction? The prices must be doubled. Everyone's afraid of dying, and they're taking advantage of that fear to ruthlessly gouge people." Though he said that, his hands sweeping goods into his cart didn't slow down at all. Seizing the moment, Yu-mun noticed that his older brother Yu-hok was also pushing a cart, and, on a sudden impulse, blurted out, "Bro, You actually took a cart too. The very next second, he received a cold look. Yu-hok stared at him icily. That look seemed to say, if I don't push a cart, should I push you? Yu-mun awkwardly waved his hand. Yu-mun snuck another glance at his brother's shopping cart and was surprised to see only one set of clothes and a black backpack in it. Seeing that he was about to go pay, Yu-mun suddenly panicked. You're not getting anything else? Yu-hok picked up a black down jacket and tossed it in, saying coolly, this is about it. All at once, Yu-mun felt that his pile of glow sticks, flashlights, and batteries made him look like a scalper at a concert. A shop that opens its doors for business, but doesn't take money? They saw the shop owner staring at their carts, which were packed to the brim. With a cigarette dangling from his lips, he let out a cold snort. This your first time here, huh? Normally, when people come, they at most dare to put down 2 items. Old Yu jolted all over when he heard that. What did he mean, 2 items? How expensive does that make this stuff? Everyone fell silent for a few seconds, but they couldn't bear to put the things back in the carts, so they hurriedly asked, do WeChat Pay or Alipay work? A bank card is fine too. The shop owner merely replied coldly, none of those work. Then he reached his hand under the counter and felt around, took out a room card from the hotel and said, swipe this. He immediately gave a little smile and said lightly, isn't there a total score on the back? Everything here has to be bought with points. Everyone froze on the spot, their faces turning pale in an instant. At this moment, the shop owner instead became enthusiastic. It's not expensive. Each daily necessity is 0.5 points. Food and medicine are 1 point. Bladed weapons are 2 points. Easy to remember. Why don't you calculate it yourselves first? Everyone stared at that cart piled high with goods, and their hearts sank. Wouldn't this directly send their score into the negatives? Just as the people in line were hurriedly backing out and getting ready to pick things again, Yu-hok pushed his own cart forward and, under everyone's gaze, took out his room card and handed it over. The shop owner had thought that after that scare, just now no one would come to pay at all, so he was stunned by the movement. He quickly came to his senses and started tallying up. Just underwear and outerwear plus a backpack. That's 3 points in total. Yu-hok seemed to think he still had plenty left, so he raised his hand and pointed at the cigarettes behind the owner. Add a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. Yu-mun couldn't hold back. Bro, you don't even smoke. What are you buying that for? That's a whole 1 point. But Yu-hok calmly packed his clothes away as he said, just in case. After Yu-hok slung the backpack over one shoulder and walked out of the shop, the total score on his exam admission ticket had already become 15. Looking at the utterly unruffled, cold expression on Yu-hok's face, Yu-mun could only think, his brother was really tough. Time quickly jumped to 7 days later, as the hands of the clock pointed to 3:12. Boss Chu, righteous to the core and holding a kitchen knife in his hand, didn't even blink as he directly drove them out of the rest area. She raised the tip of the knife, pointed toward the misty direction, and explained coldly, walk that way, 200 meters is the crossroads. She then waved at them again and reminded them, don't panic, if you're late, you won't have a choice. After speaking, she went back into the house, paused and looked back. I hope this isn't a final farewell. Then, with a bang, she shut the inn's front door, leaving only the light box with lodging written on it shining outside. The dining sign went dark as well. Outside, it suddenly became so quiet it felt icy, as if no one had ever come here. Everyone stared at the sudden change of scene, feeling their hearts crawl. Yu-mun trembled with nerves. This really isn't a haunted house? Yu-hok remembered the last time he'd asked Ilobisa. Ilobisa had said this wasn't a supernatural incident, but just as he was about to say more, he was forcibly cut off by a violation warning. So what is it? Really? Yu-hok had already started calculating. Next exam, he'd just trick another proctor. So he hoped the proctor he drew this time would also be honest enough, easy enough to fool. This fog was strange. Once you passed through it, you could never return to where you came from. Driven out of the rest area by Boss Chu, everyone walked in the direction she'd pointed. Before long, they saw the crossroads, with a security booth standing in the middle of the road. But in the next second, they realized there was also a figure leaning against the outside of the booth, only the fog was so thick they couldn't see clearly no matter how they tried. When they got closer, they found it was actually the blonde kid who had stormed off. His whole body was mottled with blood, one hand hanging weakly at his side, looking utterly miserable. No one knew what he had gone through. The patient-gowned man stepped forward to ask how long he had been here and why he hadn't gone back to the rest area. The yellow-haired guy first stubbornly tried to act tough, tossing out one line, 2 days. If I go back, I'm a loser. Then he awkwardly added an explanation. Actually, the moment he turned around, he got completely lost. He couldn't even find those several buildings by retracing his steps. Only this place was still visible. Yu-mun then asked him why he didn't keep walking, and the yellow-haired guy, looking miserable, pointed at the road signs and told them to see for themselves. Only then did everyone look around. 4 roads at a crossroads with signposts standing in each direction. But what was written on them was foreign languages, history, Chinese, and mathematics. Just then, the loudspeaker at the security booth sounded again, still that familiar radio voice, telling them to choose one subject to take on their own, but they only had 30 seconds. The other subjects would be tested later. Anyone who was late would directly lose the chance to take the exam. Chen Jian grabbed Yu-hok in one go and instantly put on a sycophantic expression. Bro, whichever you choose, I'll choose. Yu-hok swept his gaze around the surroundings. Expressionless, he tossed out one line. Is there even a choice? Because from his point of view, all the road signs in the foreign languages direction were written entirely in foreign languages. Before Yu-mun could speak, Yu-hok let out a cold snort first and directly shouted, Yu-mun. Yu-mun was still in a daze and blankly replied, What is it? Yu-hok pressed down with a cold line. Do you see anyone at the intersection? Yu-mun was shocked on the spot. Yu-hok's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the person standing in the snow holding an umbrella and said, For example, a certain ever-present, lingering proctor. What kind of experience is it when you find that what you're seeing is completely different from what everyone else sees? At this moment, Yu-hok's feeling is simply, this is fucking annoying. And when he clearly saw that the person who looked like an invigilator was actually waiting for him, that annoyance instantly doubled. The moment Yu-mun heard the 3 words, the invigilator, he jolted, face turning pale. Don't tell ghost stories. Everyone else also tensed up at once, as if facing a formidable enemy. The subjects haven't even been chosen yet, and the invigilator is here already? He glanced all around, but didn't see a single human figure. Aside from the road sign, there was nothing. Listening to the commotion they were making, Yu-hok quietly let his gaze fall onto that shadow. He lazily lifted his eyelids, then slowly closed his eyes again. He asked them if they really wanted to pick foreign language with him. Yu-mun immediately nodded, saying foreign languages were his weak spot. But then on second thought, there didn't really seem to be any subject that wasn't a weak spot. Qinshi brought his hands together like praying to a god and bowed to his brother. Bro, wherever you go, I'll go. Please bless me to pass every subject. The others behind them were the same, staring at him with hopeful eyes. Yu-hok didn't speak. He tugged up his collar, clicked his tongue, and muttered a quiet, what a bother. He turned around and started walking. Yu-mun didn't hear clearly what he had just said and asked again. But Yu-hok, as if to reassure him, asked, Foreign languages over there? Everyone pointed in the same direction in unison. Yu-hok let out an then lifted his foot and headed that way. The next second, the loudspeaker suddenly blared, There are 5 seconds left to choose your subject. Everyone jolted and immediately took off running. They closely followed on Yu-hok's heels. Yu-hok, carrying a backpack, took a long stride and walked straight toward that proctor, whom only he could see. Jin-gu, dressed in a black coat and holding a black umbrella, waited unhurriedly for him to come over. As Yu-hok approached, Jin-gu drawled as he spoke. What a coincidence, we meet again. With that, he tilted the umbrella slightly. He brought Yu-hok fully under the umbrella. The two stood facing each other under the same umbrella. Yu-hok's face was still cold, while Jin-gu was smiling lightly as he deliberately teased him. Humph, sir, have you been sleeping well these past few days? A proctor that other people might never see in their entire lives. And he had run into him 3 times in one exam. And just because his right to choose had been revoked, he had to be accompanied through the exam. Right now, the blue proctor Jin-gu was smiling in a way that really made one want to punch him. Yu-hok's face was full of killing intent as he stared at him with that, "Are you out of your mind?" look, because he had committed 3 violations in the last exam and had his right to choose revoked. This time, he couldn't pick his own subject. What he would be tested on was entirely up to the proctor. And it just so happened that this annoying proctor Jin-gu was unbelievably lazy. He simply clicked random, and so the subject drawn was a foreign language. Yu-hok was even more upset now, mainly because he was seeing this guy Jin-gu again. And Jin-gu, who was being held a grudge against, drawled as he teased him. "You don't look very happy. Whatever you want to be tested on, just tell me earlier." The result was cut off directly by Yu-hok. "There's still a next time, my ass?" Jin-gu wasn't annoyed at being interrupted. Instead, he laughed even more happily. "Hard to say. After all, you've got a whole pile of prior offenses." There really was no way to refute that. The two of them were still snapping at each other when 2 shadows suddenly emerged from within the white mist. After a while, the two of them burst out of the white fog. Only then did I see clearly. It was Yu-mun dragging his dad along. The two of them were panting hard. The moment they saw Yu-hok's figure not far away, the two of them immediately got excited. Yu-mun shot over at an impossible speed, shouting excitedly as he ran, "Bro!" But when he saw the proctor standing beside Yu-hok, he slammed on the brakes on the spot, his face full of disbelief. He even unconsciously slipped into honorifics as he spoke. "Why you... Sir, what are you doing here?" To his surprise, Jin-gu answered in a tone of utter familiarity, "Keeping your bro company while we wait for you guys." Yu-hok couldn't even be bothered to roast him anymore and just closed his eyes to play dead. Yu-mun had an instinctive awe of the proctor. He shrank back and hid behind his brother, asking in a small voice, "The full recording from the previous round. Does it have to be carried over into this round?" But Jin-gu merely shot him a cold glance, as if in warning. Yu-mun backed down instantly. "Forget it. Forget it. Matters between a big boss and a heavenly boss are none of my business. I'd better keep my mouth shut." Just then, two more figures stepped out of the mist. Some foreigner, supporting a heavily pregnant Yuyo. But after that, not a single other person appeared, and Yu-mun even started to wonder if they'd never come in at all. Finally, just as everyone's eyes were starting to ache from staring, two more people walked out, but they were two unfamiliar men, and Yu-mun cried out on the spot, "Why are there other people?" When Yu-hok saw this scene, he immediately turned his head and glared fiercely at Jin-gu beside him. But Jin-gu wasn't flustered at all. He smiled leisurely and said, "Whoever said the exam participants have to be fixed?" Then, as if he were being magnanimous, he started to make up the lesson for them. Choosing the same exam doesn't mean you'll be assigned to the same examination room. For example, the proctors Jur and Ilobisa are also in charge of foreign languages, but they're not in this session. What does that tell you? Yu-hok spoke coldly. "It tells us they don't want to see you either." Jin-gu fell silent for a moment. Then he picked the conversation back up with a smile. "It also tells us that there are fewer people in this session, so only one proctor is needed." Only then did everyone come to their senses. After waiting so long with no one showing up, it was highly likely they had been assigned to other examination rooms. In the end, counting Yu-hok, there were only 7 people taking this exam. Yu-mun patted his brother on the shoulder and let out a long breath. "Good thing old you didn't get left behind." Of the two newcomers, the quiet one was called Jin Won-ho, an old test taker. The other was called Jin-bin. At this moment, old you was once again displaying his bizarre social skills, going straight up to Jin-bin to get chummy and casually asking, "For this foreign language exam, how are we going to die this time?" An exam that even makes the proctor frown just hearing about it. How outrageous does the difficulty have to be? Old you kept chatting. Jin-bin said that they'd been in the same exam room for the last test, and that this was already his 3rd subject. When the first 2 subjects came up, Jin-bin's face instantly darkened. He lowered his voice and said, "Just coming back alive is already good. The scores are really low. It's very hard to pass." Listening from the side, Yu-hok had a hunch that they knew some key rules, so he asked, "Do you know what the passing mark is?" Jin-bin replied, 60, obviously. You guys didn't know. Old Yu was stunned and thought back to the last exam. All of them were newcomers taking it for the first time. He only remembered that at the moment of settlement, the screen said, "Score this time, 24 points. Jin-bin muttered a quiet "no wonder," then laid out the rules clearly for them. There are 5 subjects in total. The written scores may fluctuate, but the total adds up to exactly 100 points, and we have to get 60 points to pass. After hearing this, old Yu was still doing the math in his head, while Jin-bin clutched his head and started trembling, because his 2 subjects together only added up to 10 points, so there was almost no chance of passing. At this moment, Yu-mun leaned over, his eyes shining. "Don't panic. We have a secret weapon. A super big treasure." He yanked that foreigner out, lifted his chin and showed off. "In our group, we even have a foreign friend." Jin-bin let out an awkward dry laugh. "We saw him as soon as we came, but he doesn't seem to understand Chinese. We basically can't communicate with him." Yu-mun pointed at his older brother Yu-hok again. "It's fine. My brother has lived abroad. He can communicate too. He just doesn't like to talk much." Only then did everyone breathe a sigh of relief. Everyone started looking for the way, and Yu-hok pointed backward with his eyes closed. Following the direction of his finger, they saw a road sign. When they went closer, they saw the words "Intercity Bus" written on it. Just then, a shabby, beat-up bus wobbled over, blaring a piercing horn. Everyone's faces were full of disdain. This bus was way too run down. The body of the bus swayed all the way. The outside was filthy and black, and it sputtered with put-put noises. Yu-hok's gaze unintentionally swept across Jin-gu's side profile. He saw Jin-gu wearing an expression of, "I despise it," but I won't say it. Yu-hok suddenly felt at ease. Sure enough, seeing Jin-gu unhappy made him happy. He then lifted his foot and walked straight toward that broken-down bus. Unexpectedly, the inside of the bus actually looked quite clean. Yu-mun followed his brother onto the bus, then glanced at the people from the same flight. He only felt that the other man's face was dark and heavy, as silent as a mute, so he sensibly walked away at once. Yu-hok picked a window seat and sat down. As soon as he looked up, he ran right into Jin-gu's gaze as he had just boarded the bus. He immediately put on his headphones, turned his head to the side, and pretended that nothing had happened. Seeing that everyone had arrived, the driver stepped on the gas and the bus shot out. Right at that moment, that annoying system voice sounded again, starting to read out a whole bunch of exam rules. Old Yu thought of the two treasures in the team and actually felt at ease, then went straight to sleep. After the system finished reading the rules, it paused, then sounded again. Due to the special circumstances of this scenario, the duration of this exam is 10 days. The subject of this exam is a foreign language. The foreign language for this exam is Romani. After that, the system went quiet as if it had crashed, and the people in the bus also fell silent for a moment. Half a second later, roars came one after another. Say that again? What language? What kind of foreign language exam would test Romani? A language you can't even find in translation software. On the highway, a shabby, dilapidated bus was speeding along. Everyone sitting in the bus was a candidate for this exam. They had originally thought that with a multinational mixed blood in the team, they had foreign languages in the bag. Who knew the system would be so inhuman, and the entire bus instantly filled with complaints. But none of this could affect Yu-hok. No matter how outrageous the broadcast was, with his headphones on, he only felt that the announcements were unbearably noisy. In his line of sight, Jin-gu walked up to him. Yu-hok immediately closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, but Jin-gu still stretched out that sinful hand. He grabbed Yu-hok's headphone cable and tugged it a few times. Yu-hok ignored him and continued pretending to sleep. That hand, as if it would never get tired, gave it another pull and said in a low voice, "Pick up the signal. Stop pretending." Yu-hok finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He stared at that hand with his eyes wide open and snapped, "What do you want?" Seeing that he was finally willing to speak, Jin-gu straightened the earphone cable in his hand. He looked at the backpack on the seat next to Yu-hok. "Excuse me, could you let your backpack give up the seat?" Yu-hok closed his eyes again and shoved his earphones back in. It doesn't want to. The earphones hadn't even warmed his ears for a second before they were taken off again. Jin-gu's fingertips brushed against the earring on his earlobe. Yu-hok rolled his eyes and glared at this annoying proctor, his voice so cold it was almost rigid. "Anything else?" Yet his hand, as if out of his control, lightly covered the black earring on his earlobe. Jin-gu pulled his backpack over and set it on the luggage rack as he said calmly, "If he really doesn't want to, then I can only do it myself." Seeing that Jin-gu insisted on squeezing into the seat beside him, Yu-hok sounded even sharper. "Can't you sit somewhere else?" Arms folded, Jin-gu replied evenly, "I'm afraid not. There are only 9 seats in the van, and 7 are taken by examinees. If I don't sit here, I'll have to go tie up the driver. And I don't think anyone else wants to see me do that." He actually hadn't counted the seats. Both of them had long arms and legs. Squeezed together, their knees couldn't avoid each other no matter what. Yu-hok wanted to stretch his legs, but if he did, he'd kick the person in front. With his temper, there was no holding it back. So he simply pushed hard and braced his leg against the one next to him. Then he yanked up his collar, closed his eyes, and was about to sleep, when he happened to hear the proctor next to him mutter under his breath, "Gypsy, hard to walk." Yu-hok was so angered by this sentence that he woke up on the spot. He yanked the collar covering his face straight and glared murderously, "Weren't you the one who chose this?" After being snapped at, Jin-gu still explained unhurriedly, "If you put it that way, I'm kind of being wronged." As he spoke, he completely ignored Yu-hok's face that clearly read, "Wronged my ass," and raised his hand to point at the foreigner in front. "Look at the people in your line." This person had American, French, Russian, and Spanish blood all mixed together, and then ended up looking like this. Jin-gu seemed to realize only then that his words were a bit offensive. He withdrew his hand and casually added, "Sorry," but there wasn't the slightest hint of apology on his face. Yu-hok couldn't be bothered to figure out what he was trying to pull this time. He just seized on the key point and stared at him, asking, "You have all the candidate information?" This time Jin-gu didn't answer, only tossed over 2 words, "You guess." A shabby bus was parked in a patch of eerily atmospheric woods, but the driver suddenly ran off by himself, leaving only the candidates standing where they were, looking at each other. The just awakened Yu-hok was also called up by Yu-mun. After getting off the bus, Yumun stuck close behind his older brother. When he looked up, it seemed as if they were completely surrounded by forest on all sides. But Yu-hok noticed that the proctor called Jin-gu was standing alone, leaning against a tree. It was as if he was thinking about something, and also as if he wasn't thinking about anything at all. Yumun recalled what old Yu had said in the car, that this road was close to the border, and he couldn't help guessing. Could this be someplace in the real world right now? Jin-bin was an old exam taker, and he immediately shot that down when he heard it, explaining that this place might reflect a faint shadow of reality. Yumun at once followed up with another guess. If this isn't reality, then could death here also not be real death? Jin-bin fell silent for a moment, then still said, "That's how it is in theory, but who would dare use something like this to run a test?" After hearing that, Yumun instantly deflated and replied in a low voice, "True." Just then, Yu-hok, who had kept quiet all this time, kicked a stone by his foot and shouted, "There's a boundary steel here." Hearing that, Jin-bin got a bit excited. At last a clue had appeared that could move things forward. He hurried over, pushed the weeds aside, and said, "It should have the place name written on it. Might not be very useful, but at least it's some kind of hint." But when he wiped off the grime and the characters underneath were revealed, he froze completely. Everyone crowded in to look together, but still no one could recognize what the writing on it meant. They could only vaguely make out that it looked like a few English words. Just as everyone was still chattering away, a mud-caked foot came closer, the driver who had just run off on his own. He raised his hand and pointed at this group of people, saying to the person beside him, "These people? These are the ones?" Then he turned his head and introduced, "This is the village chief. He'll take you to the Xing family." After that, he added, "Remember, don't go into the woods." With that, he stopped paying attention to the group, his figure flickered, and he slipped straight back into that broken-down bus. The next second, with a stomp on the gas, the car's tail swung out and sped away into the distance. Old Yu was still there sighing with emotion. So this guy actually can talk. Yu-hok's heart sank. This village chief is probably just a front. So he stepped forward to fish for information. What did we come here to do? From the village chief's words, they finally learned. This trip was to find someone called Hyukpa. The village chief said that Hyukpa was a gypsy who came here during the war. Once she arrived, the whole village started becoming abnormal. At this point, he even casually complained, "I really don't know what you people are thinking, actually choosing to stay here for 10 days. Hearing that, everyone broke down on the spot. Who would want to live in a place like this? Isn't it all the system force-feeding them? The village chief led them toward where Hyukpa lived, saying on the way, "There used to be 18 households here in total, and the village is very close to the border." As Yumun listened, he also noticed that the ice by the lake was frozen very thick. The village chief went on, saying that stone steel was carved by Hyukpa, but what it's supposed to mean, no one can say for sure. Once inside the village, Yumun stared in a daze at that dense cluster of houses. He muttered under his breath, "No matter how you look at it, this is clearly more than 18 households." The village chief paused for a moment, then said vaguely, "Some died, some left, so there are fewer." He casually pointed at 2 more. "These 2 are obviously unoccupied." As soon as he said that, Yu-hok's voice cut in coldly. "Can't tell." Yu-hok swept his gaze around. "To me, every house looks unoccupied." Everyone froze, stopped in their tracks, and followed his lead to observe. Gu had a bad feeling the moment he entered the village. It was too quiet. Weeds had grown wild. All the doors and windows were locked, and apart from the sound of the wind, nothing could be heard. Everyone else was worried the exam might cost them their lives, but he was absurdly relaxed and slept straight through to the exam hall. He asked the proctor next to him, "Do you have access to all the candidates' information?" Jin-gu tugged back and forth with him for a few exchanges, and Yu-hok instantly lost the desire to ask. Yu-hok went over it in his own mind. The system definitely holds complete files on all candidates, so how much can a proctor actually know? Judging from his previous dealings with proctors, what they can know should be very limited. The proctors are also constrained by the rules. Maybe if they want to get specific information, they too have to go through a complicated process. Otherwise, given all the times he'd been targeted before, the first one to be investigated should have been Yu-hok. Seeing he'd been silent this whole time, Jin-gu propped his chin and said, "Relax. I'm not interested in candidates' information." Yu-hok responded with extreme perfunctoriness and only answered with an "oh." With this precious big baby in their team, in order to prevent everyone's native languages from being too convoluted, the system had forcibly slapped on a gypsy setting. This blame couldn't be pinned on the proctors either. Moreover, Yu-hok glanced again at the Jin-gu beside him. He kept feeling that ever since getting on the bus, Jin-gu hadn't been in a good mood, like his mind was elsewhere. Yu-hok's eyes started to sting again. He simply closed his eyes, rubbed the corners of them, and went straight to sleep. The bus drove onto a very bumpy mountain road. Everyone was jolted so hard their hearts leapt into their throats. Looking out the window, there were sheer cliffs everywhere. Really, like one wrong step would mean instant death. Yet just as everyone was still complaining that the road was too narrow, a sudden landslide appeared up ahead, and a huge tree lay across the middle of the road. But the driver just slammed on the gas and charged straight at it. This junk bus suddenly shot forward. Everyone only felt their whole body being flung into the air. The next second, they were slammed hard back onto the ground. How the hell did he even drive through that? Everyone's faces went pale. Someone was even about to foam at the mouth. The bus was still wobbling and inching forward, and they watched as the sky grew darker bit by bit. Old Yu stared at a roadside marker outside the window and said, "This road seems like it's already close to the border." The driver didn't say a single word. No matter how they asked, they couldn't get half a syllable out of him. Finally, he slammed on the brakes, and the bus stopped. After everyone got off, Yu-man knelt on the seat and shouted toward the back row at Yu-hok, "Bro, wake up, we're getting off." In a situation like this, he could still sleep so soundly. Yu-man really had to hand it to him. His heart was way too big. After a nap, Yu-hok's eyes did feel a bit better. He tilted his head and looked over. No one. Beside him, he stood up and asked, "Where are we?" Yu-man hurriedly replied, "No idea. The driver just stopped the bus here and ran." Yu-hok froze. "What do you mean ran?" Yu-man pointed out the window and said, "He just took off down that dirt path." Yu-hok lifted his eyes to look. A pitch-black forest. The branches were a tangled web, and through the gaps you could vaguely see rooftops at different heights. This was the exam site. It didn't look like any decent place at all. A village early in the morning, and not a single household has its door open. Not even the slightest sound of pots and pans. As everyone walked in, goosebumps instantly rose all over their bodies. This was just way too terrifying. All of them glared in unison at the village chief leading the way, forcing him into a panic so that he hurried to explain, "People really do live here." Right after that, he came out with something even stranger, saying that people here don't really dare go out. They sleep as long as they possibly can. Then he glanced at the row of houses on the other side of the river. He lowered his voice to the minimum. "It's not safe at night. If you're going to stay here, remember, once it gets dark, don't go out, and no matter what sounds you hear, don't open the door." Everyone was stunned, about to ask. Yu-man suddenly burst out with a curse. His face turned pale as he nudged Yu-hok in terror. He pointed toward the window of one of the houses, and Yu-hok followed the line of his finger to look. There was actually a shadow standing by the window. They saw her carefully lift the curtain and secretly peek at them. Jin-bin saw it too. There was someone behind another window as well. Yu-man clutched his chest, his voice trembling. "I just caught a glimpse of a figure and nearly died of fright." The village chief explained, "With guests coming, they're curious too. It's just that they've been scared too many times, so they don't dare come out." Yu-man was even more confused. "Then they just stay inside all the time, without eating or drinking?" The village chief said, "No, every household here has a cellar with stored food. They just put down a ladder and go down. And it's not that they never go out at all. In the afternoon or toward evening, they'll come out and walk around for a bit. But before it gets dark, they all hurry back into their houses." Yu-hok asked from behind, "Is it related to Hyukba?" The village chief paused, nodded lightly, then lowered his voice. "I heard you came to hire her for a job?" As soon as everyone heard a clue related to the exam, they pricked up their ears. Yu-hok pressed on. "Hire her? For what kind of work?" Du Jang-chong kept a stiff face and said coldly, "Dead people's work. Hyukba likes dealing with the dead. For example, stitching broken people back together. If someone's family member goes missing, they come to her to see if they're dead and where they died. Sometimes she even picks people up herself to work on." Yu-man was so scared he went blank, his voice shaking. "What does pick people up and bring them back mean?" The village chief thought for a moment, then said quietly, "A few years ago, a young woman floated down this river. Hyukba dragged a big basket and packed the thing away." The word "packed" sent a chill down everyone's spine. Several grown men gagged on the spot and nearly threw up. Only Yu-hok kept prying as if nothing had happened. "Since she works on dead people, what are you living folks afraid of?" The village chief did not explain further. He just turned his head aside and left a line behind him. "Stay one night and you'll understand." Steadying their emotions, the group followed the village chief, stepping over the thick ice toward Hyukba's house on the far side of the lake. Over there were a few small stone houses, with dried branches hanging at the doors, gloomy as if they were staring at you. Warned not to develop improper relationships with the candidates, the proctor, who had no little villa of his own, was forced to share a room with them. At this moment, The examinees were standing right in front of the house door of this question. Hyukpa, just as they were about to peek inside, a choking, thick incense smell rushed out, and the village chief immediately backed far away. Yumun took out his phone to check the time, only to find the screen showing 23:13. But it clearly looked like early morning outside, so the time made no sense at all. As he was worrying over it, a voice came faintly, 6:55. Yumun and Jin-bin were both stunned and looked over in the direction of the voice. They saw Jin-gu shaking his phone in the air. For you, on the dot. Jin-bin hadn't seen Jin-gu in the previous round and just assumed he was an ordinary examinee. So he leaned over and asked, "The season and time for each exam are different. How did you sync it?" Jin-gu replied unhurriedly, "Probably because I'm the proctor." Jin-bin first let out an "oh" with a smile, then a second later realized what he had just said, and his whole body froze on the spot. The backpack in his hand even slipped to the ground in fright. "Who are you?" Jin-gu acted as if he hadn't heard, completely ignoring how shocking his words were to others. He directly pulled out a card and walked toward Yu-hok. He waved the card in front of Yu-hok's eyes and asked, "Does this count as helping you once?" Yu-hok said nothing, only shot him a cold glance. Yu-hok raised his hand and snatched the card from between his fingers in one go. He flipped his hand and planted the card upright in front of Jin-gu, his tone very sharp. "Do me a favor and read all the words. Additional requirement. Do you know what additional means?" Jin-gu's expression was somewhere between a smile and not, and he replied mildly, "Don't really know." He also casually took back the card that was almost pressed against his face. Yu-hok told him to get lost and look it up in the dictionary, then turned his face away, looking like he didn't want to spare him another glance. A candidate asking the proctor for the time is part of the proctor's job and doesn't count as extra help. Jin-gu lowered his head to look at the card in his hand and muttered quietly, "Sure enough, there are rejects." He put the card back into his pocket, curled his lips, and added, "What a pity." At this point, the village chief went on with the procedure, telling them that Hyukpa gets up at 7:30 every day, then would first take them to recognize where they'd be staying. To put it bluntly, it was just a few small rooms lined up behind Hyukpa's house. As soon as the door was pushed open, they saw a tea table with 2 loaves of bread on it that looked dry at a glance, and a crow that was pitch black all over. As for Hyukpa, the village chief said there were only 4 rooms, so they'd have to squeeze 2 newcomers to a room, and since Chen Yao was a girl, she'd get a room to herself. They also had to factor in the proctors. There were 5 more people in total. Yu-hok glanced at Jin-gu beside him and asked, "Do they have one of your proctor villas here?" Jin-gu snorted, "Thanks to you, it's full-time proctoring this time. No little villa to live in." Yumun suggested that he, Old Gon, and Yu-hok share a room. After all, they were all family, so squeezing in together would be fine. Who knew that the foreigner, as soon as he lifted his eyes and saw the proctor standing beside them with a faint smile, immediately stated on the spot, no matter what, he would not share a room with him. So the few of them timidly shifted their gaze back to Yu-hok. After all, apart from Yu-hok, everyone was afraid of this proctor. Yu-hok wasn't afraid, just annoyed. His face darkened, and he followed Jin-gu straight into the room. But the moment they stepped through the door, they heard that pitch-black crow coldly spit out a system prompt. "The time is now 7 o'clock. The first listening exam will be played at 7:30. They had thought the system would go quiet after that, but before long, the voice sounded again. Additionally, candidates and proctors are forbidden from developing improper relationships. Please reassign the rooms." That line left everyone dumbfounded, even taking the edge off their exam nerves a bit. Yu-hok was utterly speechless, his gaze falling straight on that black crow. The crow, as if tireless, opened its beak and repeated the message once more. This exam system was practically love-brained. Just sharing a room was enough to make it jump out with a warning. Proctors and candidates are forbidden from developing improper relationships. Everyone clogged up the doorway, unable to go in or stay out. The atmosphere so awkward it felt taut. Yu-hok walked straight up to the black crow, narrowed his eyes, and asked through clenched anger, "Who the hell set this stupid line? Can I file a complaint?" The next second, the warning beeps from the exam system sounded on Jin-gu's side. Pressing down the alarm on his hand, Jin-gu drawled a reminder. "Friendly reminder. It's best not to ask about that. On the first warning, I can't leak anything. On the third, you're expelled from the exam." After hearing that, Yu-hok said nothing more. He just turned around and slapped his palm down on the crow's head. Jin-gu glanced at Yu-hok and immediately sensed. It was written all over him that he was pissed off, so he simply took the initiative to negotiate with the system, raising his hand to point at that foreigner. "Then I'll stay with this mixed-race candidate." The raven fell silent for a moment, as if evaluating what he'd just said. Then it opened its beak with, Developing improper relationships is forbidden. Expressionless, Jin-gu pointed at Yu-mun instead. What about with him? But the system still gave the exact same line, word for word. Yu-mun was about to explode from hearing it, nudged old Yu, and lowered his voice to complain. What kind of trauma did this system go through? How'd it get this touchy? Jin-gu was getting a bit annoyed by the back and forth too, so he simply suggested, then just invigilate the whole time and let the candidates do their thing. But as soon as the words left his mouth, the warning light in his hand lit up again. Old Yu was so mad he actually laughed. Not allowed to share a room, and you still want full-time invigilation. How is that remotely reasonable? Jin-gu's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at that pitch-black raven head, line by line. Everyone thought he was about to lose his temper, but instead he spoke like he was compromising. The candidate sleeps in the bedroom and he'll put up with the sofa. This time, the raven finally kept quiet, which counted as tacit approval of the arrangement. Yu-hok turned his head, watching the invigilator walk over to the sofa and sit down. Even if the two of them didn't get along, Yu-hok had to admit, this man had a very distinctive air about him, like he could overturn the rules at any moment. After all this commotion, it was already 7:30, and suddenly there was movement from the main house. At that exact moment, the raven spoke as well. The listening test now officially begins. Everyone, having learned their lesson from the previous round, immediately rushed to the front of Hyukba's house. The village chief heard Hyukba open the door and grew extremely nervous, quickly reminding them, Hyukba has a rule when seeing people. Before entering, you must draw a card. After he finished speaking, he was still trembling. This matter directly decides whether you can get a good night's sleep tonight. Don't think about running away. If you don't draw, the consequences will only be worse. As soon as he finished, he strode off in big steps, leaving behind a distant shout. Remember, whatever you do, don't make her angry. Only a group of examinees were left. You look at me, I look at you. We have to draw cards again? Just then, Hyukba's door also happened to open. From behind the door came out a skinny old woman, her figure like a vulture, slowly pushing the door as she emerged. The ravines on her face were frighteningly deep, yet her eyes were starkly black and white. The clearer they were, the more eerie they seemed. She swept her gaze over all the people waiting at the door. The next second, she suddenly hooked up a strange grin, just like Hunter A from the previous round. It sent a chill down everyone's spine. She babbled a string of incomprehensible gibberish, then pulled out a stack of cards from her bosom. She pinched the cards into a fan shape and thrust them straight forward. Old Gon was standing at the very front and hesitantly pointed at himself. Should I draw? Hyukba didn't say a single word and simply jammed the cards into his hand. Old Gon had no choice and could only draw one. Everyone crowded over for a look, and their faces instantly darkened, because on the revealed card face was a grim reaper holding a scythe. No one knew exactly what it meant, but however you looked at it, it didn't seem like anything good. At this moment, however, Hyukba let out a crisp, cluck-cluck laugh, as if especially delighted. Immediately after, a piercing creak sound followed. Just like in the previous exam, the questions appeared on the blackboard and on the door. Answer in the correct order to get points. The instructions for the questions were, only 3 questions are listed up there each day. If you don't answer correctly, you get no points. Before everyone could recover from the shock of the 2 words enter coffin in the question. This round's exam questions were Hyukba. He started jabbering a whole string of foreign language again. This was probably the original script for the listening test, but nobody present could understand it. The test takers and the proctor accompanying them were all completely bewildered. When Hyukba paused, there was another creak from the door, and then a prompt popped up right after. The listening passage has been played once. It will immediately start the 3rd playback. Hyukba had just opened his mouth, getting ready to continue reading. A hand suddenly shot out and stuffed a pitch-black lump of something directly into Hyukba's mouth. Only in the next second did they see clearly that at some point Yu-hok had stepped in front of Hyukba. His expression was calm as he casually said, "Sorry, hold that thought for a moment." Hyukba had run rampant in the system for so many years, with more test takers killed by him than he could count, and had never imagined he'd meet someone this daring to lay hands on him. For a moment, his whole body froze on the spot. Old Yu and the others were startled by this move. They raised their hands, wanting to pull him back, but were held down by Yu-mun. After all, his older brother was the kind of person who could kick out a score of 8 points with 1 strike. And those 2 newcomers looked even more blank. Who am I? Where am I? You can do this kind of thing? Yu-mun recovered, lowered his voice, and asked his brother, "Where did you get this thing?" Yu-hok said he casually picked it up from the house, and even added, "It's not really dirty." Yu-mun immediately had black lines all over his face. Is this a question of whether it's dirty or not? He then remembered that before the village chief left, he had specially warned them, don't make Hyukba angry. Pulling something like this now, Hyukba is probably going to be furious, right? The more everyone thought about it, the more panic they felt. Won't something happen? The village chief had just emphasized this, and it's only been a few minutes. At this moment, even the proctor Jin-gu was looking at Yu-hok and said blandly, I feel like if you go a day without breaking a rule, you feel unwell all over. And Yu-hok, for the sake of him being the proctor, shot back a few lines. Does the rulebook say you can't pause the listening section? Or does it say you can't predict the questions in advance? Jin-gu gave him a glance and replied quite seriously, It doesn't. Yu-hok immediately glared back. Then how is it a violation? Jin-gu hadn't expected to be countered by him using the rules themselves. Anyway, the rules weren't made by Jin-gu, so the corner of his mouth lifted and he turned around, making a please, go ahead gesture. Ignoring Jin-gu, he reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his phone, right in front of everyone. Calmly, he unlocked it and opened the recording. Then he tore open the cloth stuffed in Hyukba's mouth, tossing out only one sentence. Continue. Both the candidates and Hyukba were dumbfounded. This was way too bold, wasn't it? The candidates still did as they were told at once, each of them taking out their phone one after another. In the next second, it turned into a row of phones shoved toward Hyukba, all waiting to record her reading the listening questions. Jin-bin had never seen examinees this intense. His hand holding the phone was shaking. Will she get mad? Yu-hok's voice was so faint it had no ups or downs. Panicking now is too late. The two newcomers were so scared they looked at each other, a chill running through their hearts. Following someone like this, is it good or bad in the end? At this moment, Hyukba started reading the listening passage again. This time, her whole body was suppressing anger, and her eyes were locked tightly on Yu-hok. But this didn't affect Yu-hok at all. Unhurriedly, he saved the recorded audio. His fingers tapped on the screen, giving that audio file a name. A bunch of nonsense. Only then did he raise his eyes to look at Hyukba and ask, Anything else? Hyukba narrowed her eyes and let out a series of cackling laughs. The next second, she suddenly grabbed Yu-hok's hand. Without giving him a chance to speak, she turned around and yanked him hard into her own room. She kept cackling, that sound making people's backs go cold. An old woman whose whole body exuded strangeness kept cackling weirdly as she dragged someone into the room. Yu-hok was the unlucky one who got grabbed and dragged in first. But when she saw that the others behind him didn't react, she immediately became displeased and tilted her head to glare at them. That was her hint that we all had to go in as well. Everyone felt a guilty chill inside, but they still forced themselves to follow her in. Seeing this, Hyukba nodded in satisfaction. After everyone had entered the room, there was a sudden click behind them. The door had closed. Startled, they all looked around. The room was simply furnished, with a few sofas, a coffee table, several balls of yarn, and a rack crammed with creepy, ugly dolls. The moment they stepped inside, they were choked by a pungent smell of incense and instinctively covered their noses. But as for this invigilator, wherever he walked, he simply stood there, as if he couldn't smell it at all. While everyone was still carefully looking around, he straightened his back again and coldly watched everything from the sidelines. Yu-hok noticed the stale tea and tobacco on the coffee table. He reached out, picked them up, and brought them close to lightly sniff. Then he lifted his eyes and swept his gaze over the two big baskets full of yarn balls. Hyukba somehow produced two dolls and handed them over. One was completely intact. The other had fallen apart into pieces. She then pointed at the pile of dolls on the rack in the corner and chattered on in an incomprehensible language. Yu-hok put the intact one back on the rack, although he couldn't understand a word she was saying. Fortunately, they were experienced. Their phones had been recording the whole time. No one expected that, in the very next second, Hyukba would shove two balls of yarn right up in his face. She pointed again at the two baskets of yarn and rattled off another string of words they couldn't understand. They still couldn't understand her, but this time they didn't need a translation. Just from her actions, it was clear they were supposed to sew dolls. Hyukba didn't care whether they understood or not. After she finished speaking, she turned around, took out an hourglass, flipped it over and set it down steadily. She didn't say another unnecessary word. They only heard the creak of the door, and she was gone. Everyone tried the door and windows one by one, only to discover that they were all locked tight. Putting together that whole series of gestures just now, everyone half guessed and half assumed, and finally pieced together a rough meaning. What she probably meant was, before the hourglass runs out, we have to finish sewing all of these dolls. For the moment, there was still plenty of time, and everyone sat in a circle, quietly discussing what to do. But just then, Yu-hok walked over to the window. He stared at Hyukba's back through the glass, as if trying to confirm where exactly she was going. Seeing his brother keep looking outside, Yumun quietly asked, "What is it?" Yu-hok watched that figure disappear into the forest, then pulled down the curtain and replied blandly, "Nothing." The instant he turned around, his gaze stopped on a doll that was about to fall apart. It wasn't that it was especially tattered, but on one of that doll's legs, there was a blue flower sewn there, which for some reason looked familiar to Yu-hok. He stared at it for a few seconds. Suddenly, he raised his hand and patted the proctor Jin-gu, who was feigning sleep beside him. Woken by the noise, Jin-gu, caught off guard, just tossed back a single word, "Say." Yu-hok picked up that rag doll, set it in front of him, and asked, "Look familiar? I'm face blind, so I might be remembering wrong." Jin-gu, completely baffled, squinted at him and shot back, "Is it supposed to look familiar to me?" But Yu-hok still had that same dead serious look, and simply went ahead and supplied the memory for him. "Last time I was punished and sent to sweep the confinement room. No, sweep the stuff out and dump it in that bin at your door. There seemed to be this one in there." Jin-gu incredulously took the hand that had been propping up his cheek away and stared at him, not bothering to be polite in the slightest. "You've actually got the nerve to bring that up? Just how brazen can a troublemaking examinee be?" Discussed the proctor and still dare to voluntarily rake up old grievances. At this moment, right in front of the very proctor he had disgusted before, Yu-hok was calmly reconstructing the scene. "I told you the piece with the tattoo had to go on top. It should have been very eye-catching. I even handed it to you, and you didn't see it." That sentence made Jin-gu so angry he actually laughed. "You deliberately made something disgusting to gross me out, and you still expected me to carefully appreciate it?" He lowered his head and casually fiddled with the rag doll in his hands a few times. The next second, he suddenly turned his head and asked Yu-hok, "If I answer you seriously, does that count as extra assistance?" Yu-hok had originally wanted to extract information from him, but as soon as he asked that, Yu-hok immediately snatched the doll back and said coldly, "If you don't remember, then forget it." Over here, old Yu was trying to thread a needle with those hands of his that shook like he had Parkinson's. After failing several times in a row, Woo-mun finally couldn't stand it anymore, grabbed the needle from his hand, and cursed at him, "Drink, drink, drink. That drinking's given you a body full of problems. Your hands are shaking now. Later your legs will shake too, and then you'll really suffer." His mouth was harsh, but his hands were deft. In just a few quick motions, he had the thread through the needle for him. Lowering her voice, Yu-yo stared at the doll in her hands, feeling an indescribable discomfort in her heart, and quietly asked, "Can we not sew it?" Old Yu thought she'd been frightened by the surroundings and was just about to say something to comfort her, but Yu-hok suddenly spoke up, cutting them off outright. Then he lowered his head again and carefully examined that pile of yarn. He picked up the two half-finished strips of cloth and held them up in front of his eyes for a close look. After a while, he stood up briskly, tossed the strips back into the yarn basket, and said coldly, "Stop sewing." The newcomer who had joined later clearly didn't believe him and immediately demanded loudly, "Why?" Yu-hok explained. They were all gray cloth, yet the finished pieces on the rack differed wildly in color. Shaking off the other's attempts to calm him, that man pressed on. "So what?" Yu-hok glanced at him sidelong, his face calm. "Nothing, I just think something's off." Jin-bin hurried to smooth things over. "Yeah, the colors are weird, but Hyukpa told us to sew. If we don't, can you really guarantee nothing will happen?" Yu-hok's patience was at its limit, and he said directly, "There's no such thing as that many sure things. Whether you listen or not is up to you." With that, he dragged over a chair, sat down by the stove, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Watching this, Yu-mun quietly asked Yu-hok, "We're really not sewing?" What he got in return was a definite answer. He turned back, pinching the freshly threaded needle. His fingers tightened, then relaxed. After hesitating for a few seconds, he still put the thread back. Since his brother wasn't sewing, he wouldn't sew either. The others looked at each other for a moment. Even the air felt stiff. Soon, they all put the yarn in their hands back where it was. After all, they trusted the one who had led them to victory in the last round. But the two newcomers just couldn't buy into this. They kept stepping back and forth along the edge of the rules, getting bolder each time. Just now, Ran Wonho had already been questioned by him, and now he felt even more that this was simply courting death. His face darkened, and he directly snatched the yarn away. "If they don't sew, that's their business, I'll sew." Jin-bin was stuck in the middle, not daring to offend either side, and felt even more miserable. The sand in the hourglass quickly ran out. At this moment, Hyukpa pushed the door open right on time. By this time, the two newcomers had finished sewing one arm and two legs, respectively. As soon as Hyukpa came in, her gaze fell on the things in their hands, and when she saw those outrageously rough stitches, her brows instantly knitted together. Afraid he would be punished if he didn't finish sewing, Ran Wonho's whole face went taut as he hurried to explain. I was held up a bit just now. Otherwise, I definitely could have finished sewing. Hyukba didn't respond. She just turned her head to glance at the others. It turned out those few people were sitting off to the side chatting idly, their hands completely clean, having done nothing at all. Hyukba's face sank on the spot, but the next second, it was as if something else occurred to her. She suddenly split her mouth in a grin. Grinning broadly, she tossed the two unfinished dolls in her hands back into the basket, then rattled off a string of incomprehensible gibberish, accompanied by a loud bang as the door slammed shut. The system's voice also sounded at the same time. Listening session is over. Tomorrow morning at 7:30 sharp, the papers will be collected. I wish you all a good score on the exam. Have you ever seen invigilators begging examinees to use their help cards? After being chased out by Hyukba, everyone was completely dazed, and in a trance they returned to their quarters. Yuman felt a guilty flutter in his heart, scratching his head and muttering under his breath. The doll Hyukba sewed. Why does it feel like it doesn't matter whether it's sewn or not? He was just about to take a chance when Olju slapped him awake with one smack. Stop dreaming. It's just that the time hasn't come yet. Yu-hok couldn't be bothered with them. Went inside, found a spot to sit down, and directly pulled out his phone to ask, "Who's got a translation app?" Yuman replied in a second, proudly holding up his own phone. "I've already downloaded the dictionaries. It doesn't need internet, and it even has voice recognition." So Yu-hok played the ghost talk he had recorded that morning. But of course things weren't going to go that smoothly. Everyone crowded together, staring at the screen, waiting for the translation result, only to see Yuman holding the phone, his expression darkening little by little, because in the translation app, there simply was no gypsy language at all in Kannada. As soon as the others heard this, they immediately took out their own phones to check, and discovered there really wasn't any. Everyone broke down on the spot. A foreign language that not even translation software could recognize, and the system actually managed to produce it. Unwilling to give up, Yuman wanted to try connecting to the internet, worried that he hadn't downloaded the full dictionary. But there was no signal here. Should they go ask the proctor? But Jin-gu, who was acting as the proctor, didn't even turn his head, just tossed back one line. They weren't the ones who drew the reward token, so they don't have the authority to use it. Yuman and the others had no choice but to turn their gaze to his older brother Yu-hok, staring at him hopefully for a long time. But Yu-hok didn't react at all, so Yuman waved his hand and simply gave up. After all, even the app couldn't translate it, so getting online might not help either, and they might just waste a token for nothing. Since joining the team, Jinbin had been hearing them talk about some kind of substitute public card, and now he finally couldn't help asking about it. So the Yuman father and son immediately started talking over each other, giving him a full explanation from the beginning. Jinbin touched his chin in shock. He had only ever heard of this reward in rumors before, and hadn't expected it to actually be real. He hurriedly pressed on. What did you do to get a chance at the card draw? That question stumped Yuman. Were they supposed to say it was because his brother had finished off the problem with one kick? Seeing how awkward they looked, Jinbin couldn't very well keep asking, and only turned his head to glance at Yu-hok, who was sitting quietly beside them and rarely spoke. Whatever the reason, the fact that they got this card meant there was a real badass on this team. His expression grew even uglier, and then with a darkened face he glanced at Liang Yuanhao beside him, whose face was just as grim. He lowered his voice and muttered, "It feels like we chose a path completely opposite to the big shots." After speaking, he secretly nudged Yuanhao with his elbow and asked him, "Do you regret it?" Liang Yuanhao was still putting on a tough front. "You get it right once, and that means you'll be right every time? Anyway, I don't regret it." But Jinbin wasn't so sure anymore. Anxiety had his nerves stretched tight, and he muttered under his breath, "But I kind of regret it." On the other side, Yuman quietly asked his brother, "Should we ask the proctor for help?" Yu-hok didn't even hesitate and directly tossed out, "No." Jin-gu walked over, braced a hand on the back of the sofa behind him, and asked, "No." He took out from his chest pocket that help card he had been carrying for a long time and said, "I've really been dying to use this." Yu-hok didn't even lift his eyelids, just held his phone and let out a cold snort as a response. Seeing this, Jin-gu also hooked up the corners of his lips, staring at him with a half smile. This guy just had to be inexplicably proud in situations like this. Ask for help? No way he'd ask for help. In this lifetime, he would never ask those idiot invigilators for help. Looking at this awkward examinee in front of him, Jin-gu simply found it amusing. Within the normal range of small questions, he asked every single one. and when ordering the invigilators around, he wasn't the least bit polite. But the moment it involved the help card, he would rather die than use it, as if using it would be the same as bowing his head. Jin-gu couldn't help complaining inwardly. What a tough bone to chew. The one being complained about, Yu-hok, didn't care about others at all. All his attention was pinned on that strange passage on the phone, stubbornly trying to dig out some clue from it. The people in the room were also tormented by this roomful of gibberish, and with this completely incomprehensible gypsy language, even if it played for a whole day, they still wouldn't understand a single sentence. Yet that mixed-race foreigner of 8 nationalities suddenly became excited, and everyone was stunned, turning their heads toward him in unison. They saw him looking extremely excited, rattling off a long string of words, but unfortunately it was all in a foreign language, and everyone still couldn't understand a thing. The youngest looked helplessly at Yu-hok. Thankfully, Yu-hok had lived abroad. He frowned and listened for a few sentences, then translated. In the gypsy language Hyukba is speaking, there are words mixed in from Persian and Russian. Yu-hok confirmed it with him once more, and the other party immediately nodded. He explained that his maternal grandfather was Russian, so he wasn't exactly fluent, but his vocabulary was decent. Persian was a language he had taken as an elective in college. He remembered that the village chief had said, "When gypsies migrate, they are often influenced by the places they live, so foreign words frequently get mixed into their language." And back then, Hyukba had come here with the Russians to escape the war. Thinking of it this way, everything lined up. Yuman's eyes suddenly lit up. He stared fixedly at him and anxiously pressed him about what exactly he had heard. But his face was full of tension. Because he only heard a few scattered words, they couldn't form a sentence at all. So he could only spit them out one by one. Yu-hok temporarily acted as interpreter. Grave, flowers, needle, sun, and then nothing more. Everyone thought there was finally a bit of hope, but when they compared these words with the question, not a single one could answer it, so all their efforts were in vain, and they were back to square one again. Time quickly slipped into evening. Chen Yao looked out of the window and noticed that some villagers seemed to have come out and started moving around. Everyone lifted their eyes, and sure enough, the village chief had said that they would come out for a walk around dusk. When Yu-hok heard this, he said nothing, just pulled his collar tight and turned to go out the door. Seeing his older brother go out, Yuman, though not knowing what he was going to do, still subconsciously followed him. Jin-gu, who had been invigilating the whole time, naturally followed as well, and along the way he even glanced at the clothes Yu-hok had bought with points. He rarely took the initiative to offer a reminder. Very few people can pass this exam, so for most candidates it's best not to spend points recklessly in the early stages. Yu-hok tilted his head and glanced at him, then shifted his gaze away, as if he didn't care. "Leave that kind of generic advice to others. I don't need it." Seeing how guarded he was, Jin-gu didn't say anything more and only watched him with a smile. As they spoke, they had already walked up to the few villagers who had rarely shown themselves. Judging from their movements, were they chiseling ice? The man's expression was very dark as he walked toward the villagers with a menacing air, while the villagers were holding sickle-like tools, chiseling the ice by the riverbank. Seeing someone approach, a woman greeted them with a smile first. "You must be new guests, right? The village chief already told us about you." But when she heard that they were staying at Hyukba's place, and had even spent an entire afternoon in Hyukba's house, both of their faces suddenly stiffened. They looked at each other for a second, then hesitantly asked, "What exactly did you do over at Hyukba's place?" The moment they heard that someone had sewn Hyukba's doll, everyone's expression changed in an instant. Their shoulders hunched, and they almost instinctively backed away. Yu-hok pressed on. "Have you seen that woman?" The woman immediately shook her head, saying they rarely went to the other side of the river. Usually only guests would go visit Hyukba. 000 from what the woman said, they could tell that other exam candidates had probably come in batches as well. But when they asked what happened to those people afterward, the woman got stuck, and after a few seconds only mumbled vaguely, "It seems like we didn't see them leave." Everyone broke out in goosebumps all at once. What did "didn't see them leave" mean? Looking at Yu-hok's tone, as cold as if he were interrogating someone, Jin-gu couldn't help complaining. "Yu-hok, you're really one hell of a peace-wrecking ghoul." Just then, there was a sudden clang. Another villager's hands were shaking so badly that the basin slipped from his grip and crashed to the ground, and he himself was utterly panic-stricken. His pupils contracted as he stared fixedly at Jin-gu and Yu-hok, his voice trembling. "I feel like I've seen you somewhere before. I feel like I've seen you somewhere before." The two being stared at looked completely puzzled. "Us?" The man looked as if his mind had already snapped. He suddenly grabbed Yu-hok's hand and, agitated, kept repeating, "Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it." Yu-hok immediately pulled his hand back. He didn't like people touching him, and stared sharply at the man as he asked, "Where have you seen it?" But the man was completely unable to communicate normally, only mumbling over and over, "I've definitely seen it, I've seen it." The female villager from before side stood up and got ready to explain for him. His mind isn't very clear. It comes and goes in episodes. Every time it happens, he likes to grab people and ask, "Haven't I seen you somewhere before?" The man again took Jin-gu's hand into his palms and said anxiously, "You know me, right? You remember me, don't you?" Jin-gu showed little expression and only asked how he had gone mad. The woman merely said, "He turns like this as soon as winter comes." After saying that, she immediately called other villagers over to drag the man away. But the man was still struggling, shouting in an emotional breakdown, "I really have seen it, I really have seen it." Yumun looked a little distressed and wanted to step forward to help. But the villagers knew they were guests of the hyukba, so they were not welcome, and certainly didn't want them entering their homes. All they could do was stand where they were, watching that madman being dragged and hauled along, forcibly shoved into the house. Yumun snapped out of it and muttered softly, "These villagers are really too, that just now. Was it a fixed plot event?" Jinbin said maybe it was, and that they'd better not rush in and interfere. Seeing that the woman was still chipping at the ice, Yu-hok asked, "Is there anyone among the villagers who understands Gypsy?" But this question seemed to suddenly touch on some kind of forbidden zone. The woman suddenly raised the sickle. With a loud pang, it smashed into the ground, and that fierce force made everyone jolt. She treated that block of ice like an enemy, and her tone instantly turned cold. "I don't understand. No one understands." Old Gon braced himself and asked, "The village head says hyukba can make the dead work, but no one understands how to communicate with her. So how does she take jobs?" The woman said all the clients come to her on their own. They don't need that. And in the past she wasn't alone. She had old Mauzi and a few children with her. Everyone perked up at once. Weren't those hyukba's family members? They immediately pressed her. Where did those people go? But the woman said she'd never seen them and didn't know where they'd gone. Following her words, Yu-hok swept a glance over toward the trees. He turned back and asked her, "Are there graves here?" The woman's hand that was chiseling the ice suddenly stopped. She lifted her head and let out a low chuckle. She raised her hand and pointed to the woods behind her, saying, "This ring of trees? It's all graves." The crowd stood in the woods, a chill running down their backs, because the village woman said that beneath this patch of forest, it was all graves. And this conversation also came to an abrupt end at the very moment the sun was at its highest. The woman stared at the gradually darkening woods, and her whole body went taut. Flustered, she grabbed the bucket and hurried to head home. Yu-hok still wanted to ask more. Seeing she was about to leave, he reached out and grabbed her shoulder. But the woman was so frightened she gave a start, violently flung his hand off, and yelled at him, "What are you doing? It's getting dark. I need to go home." Yu-hok's hand stopped in midair, his eyes narrowing slightly as his heart sank. This woman was really strong. The female villager picked up the ice bucket and stammered as she took a step back. "It's getting dark. You should all hurry back to your rooms too." As she spoke, she retreated again. Yumun was just about to ask, "What's wrong with it getting dark?" Because the village chief had also said that the villagers would go back indoors before nightfall. The female villager looked even more flustered, her eyes nervously darting around. She lowered her voice and warned, "When it's dark, there are ghosts everywhere. They will come and knock on your door. Open your windows, stand by your bed, or crawl under it. You must be careful." After speaking, she even very seriously made a shoe gesture. This gave everyone a huge fright, making goosebumps rise on their skin layer after layer. After the female villager finished, she didn't wait for their reaction. She turned around and ran toward her house, as if something really were chasing her from behind. Before long, the village returned to a deathly silence again, exactly the same as when they had first entered it. With no leads and having just been frightened, everyone discussed it and decided, why don't we go back to the rooms and hide for now? But Yu-hok, this odd one out, only tossed out one sentence, "I'm going into the woods." The moment he finished speaking, he turned and walked toward the forest. Old Yu was so scared on the spot that he jolted. "Where are you going?" Seeing him step in without the slightest hesitation, Old Yu knew he couldn't stop him and could only grit his teeth and add, "At least take a light with you." Yu-hok didn't look back. With his back to them, he just waved his hand casually. Old Gon grew anxious and flustered, quickly asking whose phone still had battery. They couldn't just watch him walk alone into the graves. But as soon as everyone unlocked their phones, all the screens were red. The batteries were about to run out, because they had all been using them in the afternoon to listen to the recording. At this moment, little Yumun suddenly pulled out a glow stick. He very earnestly said that he had spent 0.5 points to buy it, just in case of an emergency. Old Yu raised his hand and slapped him. Since you were going to buy something anyway, why didn't you buy matches? Yu-man explained, aggrieved that he had read too many novels. There are some places where you can't use an open flame. As he spoke, he yanked Old Yu and charged toward the forest. Hurry up, hurry up. In a bit my brother will be out of sight. Yu-yo thought for a second and then ran after them as well. Only the two newcomers were left standing there in a daze, staring at their backs heading toward the graveyard, quietly marveling. Are they this reckless even during exams? Jin-bin asked hesitantly, so are we going or not? Sun Yuan-hao immediately turned around. I already said it's all graves. If you want to go, you go. I'm going back to the house. On the other side, in the silent woods, Yu-hok looked down at a broken tree branch he had stepped on. He lowered his head again. His foot was still stepping on that same branch. He casually kicked backward, the motion crisp and neat, and as luck would have it, it landed right on Proctor Jin-gu's ankle. Jin-gu stared at the person in front of him, the corners of his mouth halfway between a smile and not, and said blandly, "Could you show a little public decency? There are people behind you." After hearing that, Yu-hok became even more brazen and started kicking all the remaining dead branches at his feet backward. As the Proctor Jin-gu, who was overseeing the exam from start to finish, he followed the repeat offender Yu-hok almost step for step, seizing any chance to help him out so that he could use up that help card. Yu-hok didn't give him the slightest leeway. Even walking in the woods late at night, he refused to turn on a light, saying his night vision was excellent, and telling Jin-gu to shut up while he was at it. But Jin-gu seemed to be into that chokingly abrasive attitude of his, and talked back, "I'm not really willing to." Yu-hok just felt that every time he ran into Jin-gu he ended up furious, so he simply turned his head away, not wanting to deal with him anymore. But the two of them had only walked a few steps when Jin-gu suddenly stopped in his tracks. He looked back warily over his shoulder, his tone turning cold in an instant. "Who's calling to a soul?" Seeing him like this, Yu-hok also put away his impatience and tilted his head to listen. The next second he heard a trembling voice, shivering as it called out, "Bro, where are you?" 000. Yu-hok was speechless for a moment, then turned his head and saw a cluster of faint glowing light, accompanied by a rustling sound, drifting over from the distance. Yu-hok bent down and picked up a handful of dry branches. He took out the lighter he had bought with fun and lit one end. Then he held up this makeshift torch and stood in place waiting. At last, guided by the firelight, someone emerged, pushing through with a few glow sticks in hand and leading the group out, still wearing a look of lingering fear on his face. "Bro, finally found you," Lao Yu panted and complained at the same time. "You just had to go into the woods to look for something, didn't you?" In front of everyone, Yu-hok reverted to that cold and taciturn demeanor, merely tossing out, "Just taking a casual look." Lao Yu asked tentatively, "So did you see anything? If you didn't, how about we head back first?" Yu-hok had one hand in his pocket, and with the hand holding the torch he made a casual sweep, pointing at the few tombstones by his feet. "Look, there's a row of graves here." Yu-man was directly scared stiff and pressed his older brother on how he had even found this place, but Yu-hok looked completely unconcerned. At noon Hyukpa went in and out of this forest. In the afternoon Hyukpa went in and out of this forest. After he finished, he asked Yu-man if his phone still had any battery. Yu-man hurried to pull it out. "There's just a tiny bit left." The next second, Yu-hok raised the torch in front of the inscription, signaling for Yu-man to take a picture of it and copy it word for word onto Hyukpa's door when they got back. Copy it there for what? To piss Hyukpa off to death? Yu-hok looked at them like they were idiots and asked coldly, "What's written on a tombstone?" Lao Gon answered in a dry, wooden voice, "The dead person's name, photo, and years of birth and death." As soon as the words fell, Yu-hok stared at Lao Gon without any expression, motionless. Lao Gon's survival instinct instantly exploded. And the deceased's relatives, and who carved it. At that point he suddenly froze. Right, these tombstones were carved by Hyukpa. Shing Hyukpa's name must be in the inscription. Seeing that they had finally caught on, Yu-hok didn't say anything more and stepped aside to make room for Yu-man. Just then, Yu-hok felt something step on him, but the only person beside him was the Proctor Jin-gu. Without even thinking, he turned his head and demanded, "Why did you step on me?" Leaving Jin-gu completely baffled. Jin-gu lowered his head and looked at his feet. They really did look like ink pad stains, but Jin-gu still couldn't help defending himself. "Am I really that bored?" Yu-hok was sure it was him and snapped back over his shoulder. Who knows, before long, Yu-man, who was crouching and taking photos, yelped again. "Who kicked me? All my photos are blurry now." Everyone immediately raised their hands to clear themselves. "No, not me." At the same time, they muttered and grumbled. "Not you, not him, then who could it be?" But as soon as the words left their mouths, they suddenly all realized at once. This is a graveyard. Then who else could it be? The next second, everyone lowered their heads in unison, and Yu-hok also realized it instantly. He swiftly shone the torch in his hand down at the ground. They saw the originally deathly still ground bulging up and sinking down in patches, as if something was crawling underground. Before they could react, those things scattered and darted off in the same direction. Seeing that kind of thing in a graveyard in the middle of the night, little Yumun was so frightened he couldn't say a word. He could only stare at his older brother with utter terror on his face. Yu-hok merely raised a hand to signal him not to make a sound. Then he lifted the torch and followed along the traces those things left. He could only vaguely sense something flashing past at high speed, bringing with it gusts of clammy, chilling wind. But in the next second he realized, where they were headed was the village. If you were in a forested graveyard at midnight and saw unknown things squirming under the ground, how would you feel? On the other side, in the house behind Hyukba, Jin-bin frowned and looked out the window worriedly. He turned back to look at Liang Yuanhao, who was washing his face, and his tone grew more urgent. "We're really just going to ignore them? That doesn't seem right." Yuanhao, however, directly said he was too indecisive. Bracing his hands on the sink, as if explaining and also as if drawing a conclusion, he said, "This round is team scoring. As long as we answer correctly, everyone gets points. Why does everyone have to rush up?" But Jin-bin still didn't agree. What if something happens to them? Liang Yuanhao's hand holding the towel suddenly froze for a moment. He quickly pretended nothing had happened and said blandly, "Then that just means they were too reckless. The driver and the villagers both warned them not to wander into the forest. They're the ones who don't value their lives." As he got up and walked past Jin-bin, he raised a hand and patted his shoulder, as if comforting Jin-bin and also as if convincing himself, "We have to cherish our lives. We can't have everyone all. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. If something really does happen, we'll still have people who can step up, and that way our chances of winning are highest." Jin-bin's face looked even worse as he stared at him. "Brother Liang, the way you're calculating the odds, you're like a human calculator." Irritated, Liang Yuanhao rubbed his head, not wanting to talk about it anymore. He turned around, ready to go to sleep, and urged Jin-bin to hurry up and sleep too. Time ticked by, and the incense in the room grew thicker and thicker, so thick it felt suffocating. Both of them sank into drowsiness, but just then, a series of thud, thud, thud sounds came, moving in from outside the door, pressing all the way in, as if crawling under the bed. Jin-bin was startled awake by this sound, but he didn't dare open his eyes. He could only listen to the movement under the bed as cold sweat suddenly poured down from his forehead. That thing seemed to know they were awake, and a light, drifting voice fell right by their ears. "I'm looking for disobedient guests. Did you sew dolls today?" When it got no response the first time, it asked again, and Liang Yuanhao's body under the quilt suddenly jerked. In the death-like silence, no one answered. That voice waited for a moment, then suddenly let out a heavy sigh. Liang Yuanhao finally couldn't hold back and shouted sharply in reply, I did! The voice immediately took on a smile. "Such obedient guests. Then you will just have to stay alive." Whoosh! After hearing this, Liang Yuanhao couldn't help but curl his lips slightly. But they didn't know that at the very moment it asked, "Who sewed more?" The death trap had already snapped shut. Liang Yuanhao was so worked up that he shouted directly, "And me, I sewed 2 legs." He only sewed half an arm. Jin-bin was stunned on the spot, his expression turning so dark it was terrifying. Liang Yuanhao still thought he had made the right choice. Just as he let out a breath, he quietly opened his eyes. The next second, he saw a scene that made his scalp tingle. That severed hand was holding a sharp dagger, hovering right in front of his eyes. Before his consciousness faded, the last thing he remembered was, its striking posture was exactly the same as that of the village woman chipping ice at dusk. At the same time, in the forest, the sky was gradually growing light. That heaving, unknown mass beneath the ground also slowly calmed, and the surface of the earth gradually returned to being flat. Everyone endured the whole night in the forest. When they came out, Yumun's eyes were vacant and he was scared numb all over, but fortunately nothing else happened. Back in the village, it was still unnaturally quiet. Yu-hok stopped in front of a house and let them go ahead. Yumun remembered, this was the house of that crazy villager from yesterday. Could his brother really believe the madman's words? Yu-hok replied expressionlessly, "No, yesterday that madman's eyes were unfocused, but they lit up for a moment when he saw Jin-gu. Rather than knowing Jin-gu, it seemed more like he believed that sentence. But whether Jin-gu paid attention to that man or not had nothing to do with him. He knocked on the door only because madmen are the easiest to pry information from. Yumun and the others still stayed with him to wait, but 5 minutes passed with no movement inside the door at all. The man was probably still asleep, so they decided to go back to Hyukba first to answer the questions, and come back again around dusk. This classmate gripped the bone pen in one hand and held his phone in the other, his whole body tense, ready to copy the answers straight off. Yumun stared at that bone pen, and his scalp tingled as a chill of dread spread in his heart. But in order to answer the questions and save his life, his hands still shaking, he pressed the bone pen to Hyukba's door and, bracing himself, began to scrawl randomly. Just as he was about to write the second answer, Yu-hok suddenly reached out to stop him. Little Yumun looked utterly confused. Isn't Hyukba's family's name on the tombstone in the photo? Then we can match both questions directly, right? When he turned his head, he saw Yu-hok squinting at him, and he got so scared that his voice grew quieter and quieter as he spoke. Yu-hok looked at him as if he were an idiot. Can't we save one question and use it tomorrow morning? Only then did Yumun suddenly remember. The question said that if no one hit a scoring point on any given day, a random person would be chosen to enter the coffin. Seeing that he finally understood, Yu-hok turned and walked over to the wall, leaned against it and pretended to nap, as if he didn't care about anything. Everyone waited in front of Hyukba's house for a while, and old Yu suddenly remembered the two who hadn't gone into the woods with them. Why weren't they up yet? The crow had already given a warning once, but old Yu was still uneasy, and lifted his foot to go wake them up. But just as he knocked on the door, the crow shrieked, "Time to hand in the papers. Hand them in." As soon as the crow's voice fell, among the pile of copied words on Hyukba's door, 2 of them were immediately circled in red. Only then did everyone breathe a sigh of relief and turn to look at Golden Thigh, their eyes full of admiration, unable to hold back their smiles. New reading questions floated up again on Hyukba's door. They were to deliver the dolls inside the house to each villager according to the contents of the notice. There is a road home where there are no trees. Can you find it? If they delivered them wrong, there would be punishment. The breath Yumun had just managed to let out in relief hadn't even fully settled before this despair reading question smashed into him on the spot and left him petrified. But before he had time to fully process it, over on old Yu's side there came another terrified shout, and everyone rushed over at once to see. In the room where the two had slept last night, the walls and floor were covered with splatters of blood. Peering through the half-open crack of the door, they saw the quilt on the bed still bulging, but there was no reaction at all from the person inside. Yumun had never seen anything like this before. She immediately covered her mouth, her voice trembling. "Is he still alive?" Old Yu was silent for 2 seconds. Judging by this amount of blood, anyone would be a goner. Old Yu had been a soldier after all, so he forced himself to muster some courage and wanted to go in to confirm. As he lifted his eyes, he saw that Yu-hok had already gone in ahead of him, and the proctor Jin-gu followed right behind, not leaving his side. Jin-gu leaned against the doorframe, his expression very faint, watching coldly as Yu-hok searched. Old Yu also wanted to squeeze in, but Jin-gu, this big guy, blocked the doorway completely. Old Yu had just steeled himself to ask the proctor to move aside, when a pig-slaughtering scream suddenly came from inside the room. Old Yu no longer cared about proctors or anything else. He rushed forward, shaking with anxiety. "Bro, what happened to you?" The corpse being pawed, it had its eyes closed and its mouth shut. The corpse being pawed, it still had its eyes closed. How could your brother be the one screaming like that? In little Yumun's head, a big question mark popped up over a small skull. Since when is it your place to judge how my brother screams? But the next second he suddenly reacted, right? With his brother's half-dead temperament. Even if he really were dying, he wouldn't scream that miserably. So who was the one yelling in that room? A few of the examinees panicked too and all rushed in at once. They saw Jinbin's face and were so terrified it was as if their souls had flown out. This scared Yumun badly as well. His throat tightened and he cried out, "Are you human or ghost?" 56 Yu-hok listened from inside the room as people shouted from one side and then the other, and only felt a headache coming on, annoyed to death. He finally couldn't hold back and raised his voice. "Shut up!" The room instantly fell silent. Someone carefully backed toward the door and asked in a trembling voice, "Is he still alive?" Old Yu stepped forward and felt Jin-bin, only saying, "He's alive, still warm." Then he asked about Liang Yuanhao, who had been in the same room. Jin-bin seemed to recall something terrifying. His gaze went blank, cold sweat poured down, his whole body trembled, and he forced out in a low voice, "He's gone." A whole group of people had spent the night in the graveyard without incident. Yet the two who had originally been in the house ran into something bizarre. At this moment, everyone discovered that, in the room where Jin-bin and the others slept last night, blood was splattered everywhere, The other person was nowhere to be seen, and Jin-bin himself had been scared out of his wits. "Did you sew dolls today?" Someone pressed him about what exactly had happened last night, and Jin-bin shook even harder, his words completely disjointed. Old Yu hurried to steady him and told him to speak slowly, and only then did they more or less piece it together. It turned out that last night something had been knocking on their bed and even asked, "Have you sewn the dolls?" The one who had sewn the most would be taken away, and wherever you had sewn would be where it got chopped. Liang Yuanhao had sewn 2 legs, so his legs were pierced first and then chopped off. Jin-bin fainted on the spot from fright. Before he blacked out, he even heard that thing say, "See you tomorrow." The blood trail extended all the way to the temple gate and then suddenly stopped. Where had Xingta been dragged off to? Everyone had a vague idea in their hearts. Most likely he had been dragged into the woods. But the forest was so big that going in to look for someone would be no different from looking for a needle in the ocean. Everyone went into the woods and walked around, but they couldn't find even the slightest trace. At this moment, the crow was still cawing, and the reading comprehension question began. The examinees could only go to Hyukba first to draw a card. Under Hyukba's oppressive presence, Yuyo's hands were shaking, but she still reached out and drew a card. Everyone crowded together in curiosity, wanting to see the card face, because Yuyo knew tarot cards. She stared at that card and explained in a low voice, "Judgment, representing resurrection, rebirth, and good luck." When everyone heard that, they were delighted. This is a good card, right? Does that mean Liang Yuanhao can still be saved? But Yuyo wasn't as relaxed as they were. Hyukba, on the contrary, fixed Yuyo with a venomous, resentful stare. In the end, she still handed a letter to them. Yumun received it with both hands. Hyukba didn't look at them, just walked on her own to that row of dolls in the corner and muttered something under her breath. Yumun was completely confused and immediately turned around to ask his older brother Yu-hok for help. Yu-hok only replied with one sentence, "She's counting heads." As if she thought the dolls weren't enough, Hyukba dragged out 2 more baskets of yarn balls. She casually tossed a few balls of yarn to the examinees. Then, just like yesterday, she flipped the hourglass over, opened the door, and left. Everyone held the yarn balls in their trembling hands, cursing in their hearts. This isn't yarn at all. This is clearly a bone-chopping knife. The next second, as if they had agreed in advance, they all threw them back. At this moment, however, Yu-hok suddenly called on Jin-bin by name and told him to repeat what he had said last night. Expressionless, Jin-bin recalled, "That monster asked if we had sewn the dolls, and we said we had. It said we were obedient guests, so we could stay alive." At this point, everyone suddenly jolted in shock. Only obedient guests can stay alive. Then what about the disobedient ones? Everyone trembled and looked toward Golden Thigh. There wasn't a hint of expression on Yu-hok's face as he icily continued. "Then they can only die. If you sew, your hands and feet get chopped off. If you don't sew, you die. Are you still going to sew or not?" This man was clearly an invigilator, yet he always managed to meddle in something, and somehow forced the aloof examinee Yu-hok to open his mouth and snap back at him. Right now, the examinees were all shut in the room by Hyukba, sewing dolls, but after last night's leg-chopping incident, who would still dare to move? If you sew, your hands and feet get chopped off. If you don't sew, you die, so do you sew or not? As an invigilator, Jin-gu was bored out of his mind. He casually picked up the letter on the table and was just about to open it. A hand suddenly reached over and directly snatched the letter from his hand. Jin-gu followed that hand with his gaze. He saw Yu-hok staring at him with a cold face. "Can you at least have some awareness of being an invigilator and stop interfering with the exam?" After saying that, he stepped right past Jin-gu and sat down on the sofa in the back. Jin-gu rubbed the 2 fingers that had just held the snatched letter. Lounging about, he stared at him and drawled lazily, "No, I suddenly feel that being an invigilator is a bit boring." Yu-hok looked at him out of the corner of his eye, a hint of amusement in his gaze. His intuition was actually pretty sharp. But in the next second, Jin-gu pulled out that help card, leaned down close to Yu-hok's ear, and drawled, "So, when are you planning to use this lifeline?" Yu-hok glanced sideways at it, then immediately shifted his gaze back to the letter, tossing out only, "Let it sit there and grow mold." But as soon as his eyes fell on the letter, all he saw were a bunch of indecipherable scribbles. "Master, you couldn't hold out for even 5 seconds before losing patience." He flung it away outright and cursed through clenched teeth. "What bullshit question is this?" Jin-gu picked the letter paper up with a smile and teased him in passing, "What's wrong? Even that little bit of cleverness from our straight-A student doesn't work anymore." Yu-hok couldn't even be bothered to spare him a glance. He turned and walked off, movements quick and icy. Finding no clues on the letter, Yu-hok simply went over to the bookcase to search. According to the backstory, his husband might be from Russia. He figured there might be hints in something other than Romani, so he went through all the books. But there wasn't a trace of anything. Hyukba had cleaned it all up way too thoroughly. With the sand in the hourglass already more than halfway down, everyone grew increasingly uneasy. They couldn't find any other hints and had no idea whether the doll was still going to get stitched up or not. Yumun suggested, "Why don't we just go to the woods again? After all, we dodged a bullet there yesterday." Everyone nodded in agreement. The woods were scary too, but at least you wouldn't get your hands and feet chopped off. Yu-hok, however, insisted on doing the opposite, saying that he was going back to the room to sleep tonight on the grounds that he wanted to test whether he'd die. Yumun was dumbfounded on the spot. "You're seriously using your damn life to test that?" Lao Yu grew even more worried. How could it be okay to leave him here alone? However, Jin-gu, who had always had almost no presence, suddenly spoke up. "Excuse me, do I not count as a person?" The examinees all froze at once. Could an invigilator also be counted as a person? But thinking carefully, this invigilator really hadn't abused his authority over them. Yet, an invigilator was ultimately part of the system. The exam system was terrifying, and so was the invigilator. Unless absolutely necessary, no one wanted to provoke him. Call him then. But Yu-hok is an exception. Called these two, one can't be provoked, the other doesn't follow the rules. Someone suggested they wouldn't go into the woods either and would stay here to keep him company. Chen Yao also hurried to voice her stance, saying she wanted to stay and help. In the end, all of them were mercilessly rejected by Boss Yu. As Yu-hok turned around, his gaze swept over the shelf of dolls arranged along the corner of the wall, and his heart suddenly tightened. Something was wrong. The dolls' positions seemed to have been moved by someone. He was just about to walk closer to take a clearer look when Hyukba suddenly pushed the door open and came back. The moment she stepped in and saw that everyone's hands were empty, her expression seemed to instantly darken. But in the very next second, she let out a cold heh-heh laugh. She turned and walked toward the tarot card drawn today. She raised her hand and flipped the card hanging on the wall a full 180 degrees. Before the examinees could even finish crying out in shock, Chen Yao said in a trembling voice, "If this card is reversed, it represents the opposite meaning, the opposite of resurrection and hope. Wouldn't that be death and despair?" As the one setting the questions, after once again seeing the examinees treat her words like they were just passing by their ears, Hyukba simply decided to be willful to the very end. She forcibly turned that card, which was supposed to represent hope, 180 degrees, directly turning it into death and despair. Then, puffing with anger, she yanked open a big sack. She grabbed all the rag dolls from the shelf and dumped them into it in one go. She then dug a filthy rag doll out of the yarn basket and stuffed it into the sack as well. She was still muttering and counting under her breath, and when she finished packing, she suddenly yanked the sack shut and shoved it in front of the Yu-hok who was closest to her. The next second, with a bang, the door slammed shut, and they were directly kicked out of the house. Yumun watched as the sky outside darkened rapidly and muttered in a low voice, "Today's hourglass is way too slow. It's already dark, and the villagers have all gone back inside." He was hesitating over what to do, and when he turned around, he saw his brother carrying the sack back into the house to sleep, with the proctor following him in as well. Yumun's heart tightened. With those two alone together, is that really safe? In the end, they decided to split up. Yu-hok and the proctor would sleep in the house, while they went back to the woods to hide for the night. As they walked, Yumun poured out his doubts. It's true the forest is full of graves, but there are only a few that actually stick out of the ground. How could the villagers be this scared? Yu replied in a way that sounded like there was more behind his words, speaking lightly. Fear always has its reasons. They finally stopped after finding a spot not far away. From this position, they could still see Yu-hok's room across the way. It had to be said, that was quite reasonable. Meanwhile, inside the house, Yu-hok pulled open the cabinet to look for food, only to hear a crisp crack. Jin-gu had snapped the bread on the table in half with his bare hands. Seeing that Yu-hok was still searching, Jin-gu even took the initiative to share half of his food with him, but Yu-hok coldly refused. He shut the cupboard without even looking back and tossed out a line. "If you want to die, don't drag me into it." Then he went on rummaging through boxes and cabinets, like he was determined to dig out something to eat. But when he closed yet another empty box, Yu-hok finally almost exploded. "Why hasn't this damned exam hall blown up yet?" He forced down his anger and stood up, when suddenly he felt a touch against his cheek. It turned out Jin-gu had brought that half piece of bread up to his face and advised him in a low voice, "Stop struggling. I already searched earlier. There really isn't anything else to eat." As he spoke, he nudged it closer to Yu-hok's face again. "I suggest you take a bite. It's not as bad as you think." With utter disdain on his face, Yu-hok stared at that rock-hard, crunchy bread, and in the end, between starving to death and choking to death, he still reached out and took it. As he tore at the bread, he still complained about Jin-gu. There are obviously 3 invigilators, so why are you the only one watching us from start to finish? Jin-gu simply pretended not to hear his temper and replied with a faint smile. This kind of boring work usually falls to the chief invigilator. Unfortunately for me, I happen to be that unlucky one. After he finished, his gaze shifted. Why? Is there someone else you'd rather have? Yu-hok nodded with his eyes shut. Either Guer or Ilobisa is fine. At least they know to bring beef. Jin-gu looked at him, his smile growing even slighter. Sure, I'll pass that on to them for you. To be remembered by a candidate like that, they would probably be thrilled out of their minds. Yu-hok had already wolfed down the bread and now casually clapped his hands, asking, "You're the chief proctor? Who decided this order of numbers?" Leaning back on the sofa, Jin-gu tapped his fingertips lightly, as if thinking, doesn't it look like it? Ability, combat power. Supposedly there are lots of reference factors. Yu-hok's cold voice pressed in again. So Jin-gu is number 1? Jin-gu only gave a small smile. He stretched out his long legs and explained in a somewhat uncertain tone. Not necessarily. They say there used to be an initial value, counted as a predecessor. Based on the limited information available at the moment, the old system wasn't like this. All the proctors came from a special selection. There were few of them, but each was elite. Among them was one particular proctor who was exceptionally young and exceptionally strong. Jin-gu seemed to be suddenly pulled back into his memories. It had been several years ago. Back then, the order was by letters, and that one was Proctor A. A problem ghoul so hungry it'd eat anything, and it actually dared to lay a hand on a proctor? The fragrance of tea slowly spread through the room, yet the mood grew inexplicably tenser. When Yu-hok heard the words proctor, he suddenly fell silent, and even after waiting a long time, Jin-gu still didn't get a response. When he lifted his eyes, he caught this rarely absent-minded examinee off guard, and raised an eyebrow. "You're very interested in that senior of mine?" Yu-hok snapped back to his senses. He immediately turned his head away, his tone cold and stiff, as if talking back. "Waiting for tea is too boring. I just asked casually. That proctor who can one-up you. Where is he?" Jin-gu let out a low laugh with a hint of teasing. "That way of putting it isn't quite accurate. When he was a proctor, I was still a candidate taking the exam. Later, I became a proctor, and I didn't work with him for long, so it's hard to say who was suppressing whom." Yu-hok shifted his gaze away and gave a cold snort, clearly displeased. Jin-gu withdrew his gaze, lowered his eyes, and his tone betrayed no emotion. "As for him now dead, I'm not sure either. In any case, he's already been removed from the system." Looking at him as he was now, Yu-hok inexplicably asked, "You don't like him?" Jin-gu pressed his lips together, his expression clouded. Did he not like that man? He could barely remember anything from those years, and of course that included the proctor. After the system's self-check detected a malfunction, all related data was sealed, and no one could retrieve it. After he woke up, everything he knew about proctors could only be pieced together from what others told him. They said that when Jin-gu was still a candidate, he always liked to go against that man. After they worked together, their relationship didn't improve much either. They remained sharply at odds. And during that system malfunction, the only ones in the malfunction zone were Jin-gu and the 2 chief proctors. In that situation, none of them managed to reconcile. In the end, Jin-gu was gravely injured, and that proctor was removed from the system. But in all these things he had heard, how much was true and how much was false, no one could say for sure. As for that malfunction, Jin-gu had forgotten it almost completely, with only one image left that he could not shake off. It was of Jin-gu, covered in wounds, sitting alone in the middle of the ruins amid a sky full of flames. Yet he still managed to lift the corners of his mouth in a faint smile. He looked at the blurred human figure in front of him. The person's clothes, face, he just couldn't remember any of it. But Jin-gu was very sure that person was the proctor. Jin-gu's hand that was holding the cup suddenly tightened. Every time he thought of that scene, his mood would sink. He couldn't say exactly what the feeling was, as if from that moment on he could never feel carefree again. Yet if he had to say he hated it, that didn't seem right either. The room suddenly went quiet, leaving only the gurgling sound of the tea. Yu-hok didn't know why, but he actually felt a strange emotion rise in his own heart along with it. He then took long strides over and poured himself a cup of tea from the pot. Without caring about anything, he lowered his head and drank. After finishing, he turned and walked toward the inner room, no longer looking back at Jin-gu behind him. At the moment he turned on the room light, Yu-hok felt even more annoyed and cursed himself in his heart. Did I take the wrong medicine or something? chatting with the proctor like this, thinking that he had already sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled open the wardrobe, which was stuffed full with quilts. He was just about to grab one out and go straight to sleep, but he suddenly remembered the proctor on the sofa outside the door, and his movement paused for a moment. The next second, a quilt flew straight toward Jin-gu, smashing at him head-on. Jin-gu reacted extremely fast, dodging to the side, and only then did he see clearly that what had flown over was indeed a quilt. He looked up at the person in front of him with a slightly "what a pity" expression. The proctor only saw Yu-hok's face full of awkwardness, his whole being practically saying, "Why hasn't the proctor disappeared already?" Before Jin-gu had time to react, the door slammed shut again with a bang. Yu-hok sat on the bed staring at the clock, waiting for the ghost hand to come. But in the midst of that ticking sound, Yu-hok's eyelids really couldn't hold up anymore. He turned over and lay flat on his back. Forget it, sleep. Another hour passed, and the ghost hand finally came. But no matter how it knocked on the underside of the bed, Yu-hok slept soundly, without the slightest sign of waking up. The ghost hand froze on the spot, and remembered there was still someone lying outside the room. So it walked straight toward the sofa. Jin-gu had only just managed to fall asleep, but ended up being woken by the knocking again, and the other party even asked him whether he had finished sewing the doll. He couldn't help pinching the bridge of his nose, cursing in his heart that this test must be insane. So desperate it wanted to take the proctor's head? His tone was as cold as ice. "I haven't. What do you plan to do about it?" The ghost hand didn't sense any danger at all and went on talking to itself. "Then I can only keep your head." As it spoke, it raised the knife, about to chop it off. Jin-gu grabbed its wrist in one swift move and got to his feet, his face full of just woken irritation.